The first sound is never the crowd. It's never the roar, the chant, or the anthem that carries over the field. The first sound that stays with you is impact. A helmet colliding with another helmet. Pads meeting with force that was never meant for the human body. That hollow crack echoes in your chest and in your memory. And for a moment, the game doesn't feel like a game at all. It feels like violence disguised as sport. I've watched collisions that stopped time. The crowd froze, the announcers fell silent, and every player on the field seemed to hold his breath. It happens so fast, you can miss it in real time. The angle, the body posture, the fraction of a second that makes the difference between getting up and never walking again. But when you slow it down, when you peel back the sound and study the violence frame by frame, you realize just how fragile even the strongest bodies are. The National Football League was built on collisions. It is the essence of the sport. Coaches preach it, fans celebrate it, highlight reels immortalize it. Players are conditioned from the first time they strap on pads to treat collisions not as accidents, but as the point of the game itself. The harder the hit, the louder the reaction. The louder the reaction, the greater the glory. But behind every celebrated blow lies another story, the one the cameras don't linger on. The body left behind, the silence after the cheer, the man who doesn't get up. There is a truth I cannot ignore. The NFL's history is written in human collisions, and not all of those stories end with a player jogging back to the huddle. Some end with wheelchairs, hospital rooms, or the kind of stillness that no athlete ever imagines when he first dreams of playing under bright lights. I remember Darryl Stingley, a wide receiver for the New England Patriots, fast, gifted, with years of promise ahead of him. In a 1978 preseason game, one hit changed everything. He collided with Jack Tatum of the Oakland Raiders, and when he went down, he never stood again. Stingley was left paralyzed from the chest down. The game continued that night. The league moved forward, us. But for Stingley, life was permanently divided into before and after. He became a symbol of what one collision can take away, not just a career, but independence, mobility, even identity. And Stingley was not alone. Mike Utley of the Detroit Lions, Eric LeGrand of Rutgers, different eras, different levels, same outcome. The body absorbing more force than it could withstand, a single impact rearranging the trajectory of a life. Every collision that ends a career also ripples outward, touching teammates, families, and fans who suddenly confront the darker side of a sport they love. The NFL is a spectacle of strength, but hidden inside that spectacle is fragility. Behind every bone-rattling highlight lies the possibility of disaster. The margin for survival is razor thin, and yet, for decades, collisions have been glorified without asking what they leave behind. The players who deliver them are remembered as enforcers, warriors, legends. The ones who receive them too often disappear into quiet rehabilitation rooms, their names slipping from the national memory as the league moves on to the next Sunday. We talk about career-ending hits like they are plot points in a larger story of football history. But for the men who lived them, they are something else entirely. They are the day everything stopped. They are the moment the game they loved no longer loved them back. When I think about these collisions, I cannot help but reflect on the culture that sustains them. Young players are praised for being fearless, for sticking their nose in and laying the wood. Coaches reward aggression, fans reward spectacle, and television slows down the replays to show us the violence from every angle. But what happens after the stadium empties? What happens when the body does not recover? Doctors have long warned about the risks of violent collisions in football. Concussions, spinal injuries, nerve damage, these are not freak accidents. They are predictable consequences of a system that prizes impact above all else. And yet, for much of the NFL's history, those warnings were buried beneath the roar of the crowd. The league itself has often been slow to acknowledge the damage. reluctant to let the violence that drives ratings be reframed as tragedy. But the truth is impossible to hide forever. Lawsuits, testimonies, and medical research have all forced the conversation into the open. We now know that the human body, no matter how strong, no matter how trained, is not designed to withstand the kind of repeated collisions football demands. Every Sunday is another roll of the dice. Most players walk away. Some limp, a few never walk again. The cost is not always immediate. Sometimes it's decades later, when an old injury refuses to heal, or when chronic pain becomes unbearable. Sometimes it's the long shadow of neurological damage, where the brain itself carries the imprint of years of violent contact. But sometimes the cost is immediate and undeniable. One hit, one moment. A stadium full of witnesses watching a career end in silence. It is in those moments that football's dual nature reveals itself. The sport is both beautiful and brutal, a celebration of human power and a reminder of human limits. The same collisions that make the game spectacular are the ones that threaten to destroy the very people who give it life. That contradiction lies at the heart of the NFL story, and it demands to be told. As I guide you through this journey, I want you to hear the echoes of those collisions not as background noise, but as central to the story of professional football. Every impact is a risk. Every cheer carries an undertone of danger. And every player knows, whether he admits it or not, that his career could end in a single play. This is not just about the men who delivered or received those infamous hits. It is about the culture that glorifies them, the economics that depend on them, and the silence that follows when the game moves on, but the players cannot. It is about the hidden cost of entertainment, the price paid in bodies and lives for the spectacle of Sunday football. So as we begin, I invite you to look past the highlight reels, past the cheers and the trophies, and into the shadows where the human consequences live. Because for every Hall of Fame career, there is another story that ended on the field in a way no one celebrated. And those are the stories we must remember if we want to truly understand the NFL's dark side. This is the story of football's human collisions, the hits that ended careers, altered lives, and forced us to confront the violence at the heart of America's game. When we talk about football, we often talk about glory. We talk about championships, dynasties, legendary plays that will live forever on highlight reels. We talk about quarterbacks who redefined the game, coaches who built empires, and fan bases who carry traditions across generations. But hidden beneath that surface lies another narrative, one rarely celebrated. One often buried until it becomes too obvious to ignore. That is the narrative of collisions, the human collisions that define the game and the lives forever altered by them. The NFL has always sold itself as more than just a sport. It's an institution, a ritual of American life. Sundays are sacred. The stadiums are cathedrals, and the players are warriors draped in uniforms instead of armor. That mythology is powerful, but mythology always carries a cost. And in football, the cost is human flesh, human bone, and human futures. To understand the stories behind career-ending hits, we have to step back and look at the culture that created them. From the earliest days of the league, violence was not an accident, tit was the selling point. In the 1920s and 1930s, when the NFL was still struggling to capture a national audience, what separated football from baseball or basketball was its brutality. Headlines praised smash-mouth football. Writers described games not in terms of artistry, but in terms of war. The sport sold itself on the thrill of impact, the spectacle of men throwing themselves into one another with abandon. By the 1960s and 1970s, this culture had solidified into tradition. The NFL Films era, with its slow-motion replays and dramatic music, turned collisions into theater. The crack of helmets, the sight of bodies flying backward. The gasps of crowds, all of it was stitched together to make the violence look not only acceptable, but beautiful. Coaches demanded toughness, players delivered, and fans cheered louder with every hit. But beneath the spectacle were men like Darryl Stingley, Mike Utley, and Eric LeGrand, athletes whose collisions were not highlight material, but life-altering disasters. They remind us that these moments are not just parts of the game. They are ruptures in human lives. Stingley went from NFL star to quadriplegic in an instant. Utley was paralyzed on live television. LeGrand, playing in college but chasing the NFL dream, suffered a spinal cord injury that left him in a wheelchair. Their stories reveal the brutal underside of the league's mythology. Doctors have long sounded alarms. As early as the 1930s, medical journals warned about the dangers of repeated head trauma. By the 1970s, neurologists were documenting long-term consequences of concussions, and yet, the game marched on. Collisions were still glorified, even when science told us the cost. For decades, the NFL denied or downplayed the risks, insisting that football's violent collisions were just part of the game. The economics of the sport made it difficult to do otherwise. Football is a multi-billion-dollar industry. Television networks pay billions for broadcast rights because they know collisions draw audiences. Fans crave the spectacle. Fantasy leagues, sports betting, merchandise, all of it feeds on the assumption that the violence is not only inevitable, but desirable. To question that violence is to question the very foundation of the league's success. But players themselves know the truth. Linebacker Chris Borland retired at just 24, citing concerns over brain damage. He said, "Football is the most violent team sport in America. That's not an opinion, that's a fact." Quarterback Troy Aikman, a Hall of Famer who suffered multiple concussions, admitted, "If I had a 10-year-old boy, I don't know that I'd let him play football." These voices are not outliers. They are men who lived the collisions, felt the damage, and understood the cost in ways fans cannot. And yet, for every player who speaks out, there are dozens who stay silent. Some stay silent because they love the game too much to criticize it. Others because they cannot afford to jeopardize contracts, sponsorships, or reputation. And some because the culture of football teaches players to suppress pain, to hide injuries, to play through damage until the damage is irreversible. This is why the stories of career-ending hits matter. They cut through the mythology. They remind us that beneath the helmets and uniforms are men with families, with dreams, with futures that can vanish in a single play. These hits force us to confront the paradox of football, that what makes it spectacular is also what makes it dangerous. And that danger is born not by the league or the fans, but by the players themselves. Consider the ripple effect. When a player's career ends in a violent collision, it does not end alone. Families become caregivers. Teammates carry survivor's guilt. Communities lose role models. The financial consequences are immense. A player who expected to earn millions suddenly faces a lifetime of medical bills, rehabilitation, and uncertainty. The promise of the sport, the dream of success, is replaced by a daily struggle for basic mobility or mental clarity. The NFL has attempted reforms: rules against helmet-to-helmet hits, stricter concussion protocols, penalties for targeting, but the very structure of the game makes collisions inevitable. You cannot strip violence from football without stripping football of what it has always sold itself to be. That is the uncomfortable truth at the heart of this documentary. When we talk about career-ending hits, we are not just talking about isolated incidents. We are talking about a system built on collisions, a culture that celebrates them, and a history that has too often ignored the consequences. The league's highlight reels glorify the moments of violence that end with the crowd cheering. But the stories we will explore are the ones that end with silence, with stretchers, with futures rewritten in the span of a single play. Over the course of this documentary, we will trace these stories. We will look at the infamous collisions that ended careers in an instant. We will examine the medical science that explains why the human body can only take so much. We will hear from players who lived through the aftermath, from doctors who treated them, and from families who carried the weight long after the stadium lights went dark. we will uncover how the league profited from the violence while too often leaving the players to cope with the consequences alone. This will not be an easy journey. It is chilling because it forces us to look directly at the cost of something millions love. It is curiosity-driven because we are compelled to understand why the game we celebrate also destroys so many who play it. And it is emotionally powerful because behind every statistic is a human being who gave everything to football and got back something they never asked for: pain, paralysis, or permanent loss. The NFL story is a story of collisions. To understand it fully, we must go beyond the touchdowns, the trophies, and the rings, and listen to the echoes of those hits that ended not just plays, but lives as players knew them. These are the stories that reveal the true human cost of the sport, the price hidden behind the spectacle of Sunday glory. This is where our journey begins, not with the celebration of victory, but with the silence that follows a career-ending collision. From here, we will dive deeper, uncovering the truths the league has long tried to soften, and the resilience of the men who endured the unendurable. The collision came like a thunderclap, sudden and merciless. The sound of helmets crashing together reverberated through the stadium, and in the aftermath, something felt wrong. The usual choreography of football players springing back to their feet. Huddles forming, referees resetting the down never came. Instead, silence spread across the field like a shadow. A man lay still on the turf, and in that moment, everyone watching knew they were witnessing not just another play, but the end of something much larger. I start here because this is how so many career-ending hits reveal themselves. They do not announce their arrival ahead of time. They come in the middle of what looks like ordinary football. A routine slant route, a blitz that almost got there, a kickoff return where a wedge never formed. And then it happens: one hit, one angle, one unlucky twist stand. Everything changes. Perhaps no story captures the reality of these moments more than that of Darryl Stingley. It was August 12, 1978. A preseason game between the New England Patriots and the Oakland Raiders. Played in the Oakland Coliseum before a crowd that expected nothing more than a tune-up for the regular season. Stingley, just 26 years old, was in the prime of his career. Drafted in the first round in 1973, he had become one of the Patriots' most reliable wide receivers. His speed and hands made him a dangerous target, and the Patriots envisioned him as a central piece of their offense for years to come. But on that night, in the second quarter, everything ended. Stingley ran a crossing route over the middle, the kind of play that had made him valuable to the Patriots. Raiders safety Jack Tatum, known as the assassin for his fierce hitting style, met him head-on. The collision was brutal. Stingley's helmet snapped backward, his body crumpled to the ground, and he never moved again. The crowd gasped, then fell into a hush. Stingley had suffered a spinal cord injury that left him paralyzed from the chest down. He would never walk again. His NFL career was over in an instant. What followed was telling. The game went on. There was no pause in the season, no reconsideration of the culture of collisions that defined the league. For Stingley, life became a daily battle with paralysis, rehabilitation, and the challenges of rebuilding an identity beyond football. For the league, it was just another entry in the hidden ledger of human costs. Stingley's story lingers because it encapsulates the harsh paradox of football. The very thing that made him valuable, the willingness to run routes across the middle. To expose himself to defenders in pursuit of the catch was the thing that destroyed him. Fans remember the hit as one of the most infamous in NFL history. But they rarely reflect on the decades of struggle that followed for the man left behind. Stingley lived the rest of his life as a quadriplegic, enduring complications that ultimately contributed to his death in 2007 at just 55 years old. And Stingley was not alone. 11 years later, in 1991, Detroit Lions offensive lineman Mike Utley suffered a similarly devastating injury. A guard with a reputation for toughness, Utley was blocking on a routine play when his head collided awkwardly with a defender's body. He fell forward, arms outstretched, and remained motionless on the turf. Trainers and medical staff rushed to his side, and as he was carted off the field, he raised his thumb skyward, a gesture that became an iconic image of courage in the face of tragedy. But Utley would never walk again. He was left paralyzed from the chest down, another casualty of football's collisions. Utley's case highlights another truth about career-ending hits. They do not discriminate by position, status, or circumstance. Wide receivers, linemen, linebackers, even special teams players all are vulnerable. The physics of the game ensure it. Bodies moving at full speed, colliding at unpredictable angles, create a level of force that no human spine or brain can reliably withstand. Every play carries risk, and most players know it. But to live inside the culture of football is to suppress that knowledge, to believe that you will be one of the lucky ones who walks away. The league has often portrayed these injuries as unfortunate accidents, exceptions to the rule. But history suggests otherwise. The stories repeat themselves with haunting regularity. In 2010, Rutgers defensive tackle Eric LeGrand suffered a spinal cord injury while covering a kickoff, leaving him paralyzed from the neck down. Though LeGrand never reached the NFL, his injury echoed the same pattern: a routine play, a violent collision, and a life forever altered. His story is part of the same continuum, the same thread that runs through decades of football collisions. What makes these stories so difficult is not only the violence of the moment, but the silence that follows. After the stretchers roll off, after the commentators shift back to covering the game, the players and their families are left to live with the aftermath largely out of public view. Rehabilitation is grueling. Financial pressures mount. Mental health struggles emerge as athletes grapple with the sudden loss of identity. The stadium lights go dark, but the collisions echo on in the lives of those affected. I cannot ignore the way culture contributes to this silence. In football, toughness is not optionally as demanded. Players are taught to shake off injuries, to play through pain, to avoid showing weakness. That culture of silence means many players downplay the risks of collisions until it is too late. When a catastrophic injury occurs, it is framed as a rare tragedy rather than as the inevitable byproduct of a violent sport. The media plays a role too. Career-ending hits are replayed endlessly on highlight shows, often stripped of their human context. The focus remains on the spectacle rather than the suffering. The story of Darryl Stingley is condensed into a single clip, the reality of his decades in a wheelchair forgotten. The thumb raised by Mike Utley becomes a symbol, but the years of rehabilitation, frustration, and resilience that followed remain largely unseen. And then there is the league itself. For decades, the NFL's response to catastrophic collisions was to move forward, to treat them as isolated events rather than systemic issues. Safety reforms have come slowly, often only after lawsuits, public outcry, or undeniable medical evidence force change. In the meantime, countless players have absorbed the cost, their lives shaped by collisions that fans cheered but never fully understood. But here is the truth that must be confronted. These hits are not accidents in the sense of being unpredictable. They are the inevitable outcome of a sport designed around violent collisions. When bodies collide at high speed, when helmets crack against helmets, when spines compress under impact, the laws of physics do not bend to tradition. They impose consequences, and those consequences can be catastrophic. As I reflect on these stories, I see a pattern that stretches across generations. Darryl Stingley in 1978, Mike Utley in 1991, Eric LeGrand in 2010. Different decades, different contexts, but the same human cost. The NFL has changed in many ways over that time, but the collisions have not. They remain central to the game, central to its culture, and central to its risk. This first chapter of our journey is about acknowledging those moments of impact, as footnotes in football history, but as defining events that force us to see the sport in a different light. These are not just the stories of men whose careers ended on the field. They are stories about the system that glorifies violence while too often turning away from its consequences. As we move forward, we will dive deeper into that system. We'll examine the medical science that explains why these collisions are so devastating, and the history of how the NFL responded or failed to respond to decades of evidence. We will hear from players who endured the long-term consequences of hits that didn't just end careers, but changed lives. And we will uncover how a culture built on toughness and silence has allowed these tragedies to repeat themselves, again and again. Because if there is one thing the history of football teaches us, it is that every collision carries a story. Some end with cheers, some end with silence. And some, like Darryl Stingley's, like Mike Utley's, like Eric LeGrand's, end with lives forever altered. Those stories must be told if we are ever to truly understand the dark side of America's most beloved game. The human body is not designed for football. That is a difficult truth, one the sport itself has resisted acknowledging for over a century. We like to imagine that athletes who reach the NFL are somehow different than their size. Speed and conditioning make them immune to the consequences of violent collisions. But strip away the helmets and pads, and we are left with the same fragile framework of bones, nerves, and soft tissue that every human being carries. Physics does not care about glory. Gravity does not make exceptions for toughness. And when two men collide at full speed, the body absorbs forces that rival car crashes. To understand the devastating reality of career-ending hits, we must look at the science that explains why these collisions so often cross the line from sport to catastrophe. Consider this: an NFL linebacker can run 40 yards in under 4.6 seconds. That means a 250-pound man is moving with the force of a small vehicle. When that velocity collides with another body, say, a wide receiver sprinting at nearly the same speed, the combined impact can reach over 1,500 pounds of force. That is more than enough to fracture bones, compress spines, and jolt the brain violently against the skull. Medical studies have long drawn parallels between football collisions and high-impact accidents. In fact, researchers at Purdue University once described repeated football hits as being equivalent to a series of minor car crashes endured weekly. The human spine, with its delicate chain of vertebrae and fragile spinal cord, is particularly vulnerable. When compressed or hyperextended during a collision, it can suffer damage that is instantaneous and irreversible. That is why players like Darryl Stingley or Mike Utley never walked again. Their spinal cords absorbed trauma that the body could not repair. Concussions, too, are part of this equation. Though they may not always end a career on the spot, concussions accumulate damage that can be just as destructive over time. In 2009, Dr. Ann McKee, one of the leading neuropathologists studying football, warned that even subconcussive hits, those that don't cause immediate symptoms, can build up into chronic traumatic encephalopathy, or CTE. She explained, "It's not one blow, it's thousands of blows, and the brain never recovers before the next one comes." Her research revealed that the collisions football celebrates are slowly eroding the very organ that defines a person's identity. But even before the science caught up, players knew something was wrong. They felt it in the dizziness that lingered after a hit, in the numbness in their arms, in the fog that clouded their memory long after games. Some shrugged it off, calling it getting your bell rung. Others pushed through, terrified that admitting weakness would cost them their roster spot. The culture of football taught them to normalize trauma. And so the collisions continued, with players suppressing symptoms until one hit pushed them beyond the point of no return. I think of Chris Borland, linebacker for the San Francisco 49ers, who retired in 2015 at just 24 years old. He walked away not because of a single catastrophic hit, but because he understood what the science was telling him about the future. "I just want to live a long, healthy life," Borland said, explaining that the accumulation of collisions made the risk too great. His decision shocked the league, but it highlighted a growing realization. You, Dan T., need a career-ending injury on the field to suffer a career-ending consequence. Sometimes the danger is hidden, building silently until the risk feels unbearable. And yet, for every Borland who chooses to step away, there are dozens who play until their bodies give out. That is the culture of football. Careers are short, contracts are not guaranteed, and the window of opportunity is brutally narrow. To sit out, to admit pain, to acknowledge the toll of collisions that feels like surrender in a profession where toughness is currency. Players often describe the NFL as a meat grinder, where bodies are used up and replaced without pause. The collisions that end careers may shock fans, but inside the league, they are part of an unspoken reality. Take Altoon, a wide receiver for the New York Jets in the late 1980s. Toon was one of the most gifted receivers of his generation, but repeated concussions forced him into early retirement. In an interview years later, Toon reflected, "It wasn't one hit that ended my career. It was all of them." His words capture the dual truth of football collisions. Sometimes it's one catastrophic moment. Sometimes it's the relentless accumulation. Either way, the body pays. Doctors have repeatedly sounded alarms, but for decades, the NFL's response was slow, cautious, and often dismissive. In 1994, the league formed the Mild Traumatic Brain Injury Committee, led not by neurologists, but by a rheumatologist with little expertise in head trauma. The committee's reports downplayed risks, often contradicting independent research. One report infamously suggested that concussions may be positive by allowing injured players to rest other injuries. These denials delayed reforms for years, leaving players to suffer the consequences of collisions while the league deflected responsibility. The lawsuits that followed exposed the cost of this denial. In 2013, the NFL agreed to a settlement exceeding $750 million with thousands of former players who suffered from neurological conditions linked to their careers. The settlement was an acknowledgement, however reluctant, that collisions had left a trail of devastation the league could no longer ignore. Yet even this agreement did not cover every player, nor did it erase the decades of silence that preceded it. The physical science of collisions explains the injuries, but the cultural science of football explains why they persist. From youth leagues to the NFL, players are rewarded for delivering punishing hits. Fans cheer the loudest for moments of spectacular violence. Commentators praise defenders for being enforcers or for laying someone out. In this environment, collisions are not treated as risks to be managed, but as highlights to be celebrated. The danger becomes normalized, and the rare catastrophes are treated as unfortunate outliers rather than predictable outcomes. This culture even shapes how injuries are remembered. When Mike Utley raised his thumb while being carted off the field, that moment became iconicless, a reminder of his paralysis, more a symbol of resilience. When Darryl Stingley was injured, the narrative quickly shifted to Jack Tatum's reputation as the assassin, focusing on the hit rather than the decades of struggle that followed. These reframings allow fans and the league to continue celebrating the spectacle of collisions without fully confronting the human cost. And yet, the science will not be ignored forever. Advances in imaging, long-term studies of retired players, and tragic high-profile cases have forced a reckoning. The story of Junior Seau, who died by suicide in 2012 and was later found to have CTE, revealed the long arc of collision damage. The story of Aaron Hernandez, whose brain showed severe signs of CTE at just 27, underlined how quickly repeated impacts could erode neurological health. These cases remind us that the cost of collisions is not just paralysis or immediate career-ending injury, but also decades of suffering that ripple far beyond the field. As I reflect on this, I realize that the conversation around collisions is as much about what we choose to value as it is about science. Do we value the spectacle more than the players? Do we cheer for the violence without acknowledging the trauma it leaves behind? Every career-ending hit forces us to answer those questions, even if we would rather not. Because the truth is unavoidable. Football's collisions are not accidents. They are the core of the sport, designed into its very fabric. They produce glory, but they also produce devastation. And until we reckon with that duality, the stories of Stingley, Utley, Legrand, Toon, So, and countless others will remain part of a hidden ledger that fans prefer not to read. This batch has shown us the science and culture that make catastrophic collisions inevitable. But the story does not stop here. To truly understand football's human collisions, we must explore the personal narratives of those who lived them, the men who walked onto the field as athletes and walked off, or were carried off as something entirely different. Their voices reveal the human dimensions of impact that no statistic can capture. The silence after a collision is often more haunting than the collision itself. In stadiums that roar with deafening noise, a sudden stillness tells you something has gone horribly wrong. Fans lean forward, players kneel, and trainers sprint across the field. The player on the ground does not move. The crowd senses the difference between an ordinary tackle and the kind of impact that changes everything. That silence has followed some of the most unforgettable moments in football, and it has carried with it the weight of lives forever altered. I remember the story of Sterling Sharpe, the Green Bay Packers wide receiver who seemed destined for the Hall of Fame. Sharpe was a master at his craft, leading the league in receptions 3 times and redefining what it meant to be a dominant receiver. But in 1994, a hit to his neck changed everything. Doctors discovered that Sharpe had a rare spinal condition worsened by the collision. One wrong move, they warned him, and he could end up paralyzed. In that instant, Sharpe's career was over. He was just 29 years old. Reflecting later, he admitted, it wasn't a choice. It was survival. His story highlights a truth that players often refuse to acknowledge until it's too late. Football can end not only careers, but the very ability to live a normal life. Sharpe's story mirrors those of countless players who never expected the game to be taken from them so suddenly. Chris Spielman, a linebacker known for his toughness, played through injuries until a neck injury forced him to stop. In interviews, Spielman admitted that he ignored warning signs for years, convinced he could push through. "You're trained to play hurt. You're trained to keep going," he said. But when doctors finally told him the risk of paralysis was real, even he had to face the limits of resilience. And then there is the case of Reggie Brown, a linebacker for the Detroit Lions. On December 21, 1997, Brown was tackled awkwardly after attempting to bring down a New York Jets running back. He lay motionless on the turf, unable to breathe. Trainers performed CPR on the field as his teammates looked on in shock. For nearly 20 minutes, the stadium remained frozen in silence, unsure if they were witnessing a death. Brown survived, but his spinal cord injury ended his career instantly. Later, he reflected, "It could have been my life. I was fortunate, it was only my career." His words cut through the bravado of football culture, exposing the razor-thin line between survival and catastrophe. These stories remind us that for every highlight reel, there are hidden reels of anguish plays that never make it into the League-S marketing packages, because they reveal too much of the cost. Yet the players themselves rarely dwell on fear. For many, the collision that ends their career is not one they anticipate. It comes suddenly, like a thief in the night. One moment, they are professionals at the peak of physical conditioning. The next, they are patients on an operating table, grappling with an identity crisis that no playbook ever prepared them for. I think often about Eric Legrand, the Rutgers defensive tackle who was paralyzed in 2010 while making a tackle on a kickoff return. Though not an NFL player, his story embodies the brutal potential of football collisions. Legrand has since become an inspiring voice, refusing to let paralysis define him. "I'll never give up," he declared in the years after his injury. His resilience is extraordinary, but his journey also underscores the fact that football creates situations where young men must summon such resilience in the first place. And then there are those whose stories stretch beyond physical injury into the hidden corridors of the mind. Altoon, as I mentioned earlier, suffered multiple concussions that forced him out of the league. But what the public rarely sees is what happens afterward, the headaches that linger for years. The moments of disorientation, the struggle to find stability in a life once defined by routine and competition. Concussions end careers in silence, without the dramatic image of a player carted off the field. They steal futures quietly, leaving men to wrestle with invisible demons long after the stadium lights have gone dark. The tragedy of these collisions is not just physical, but existential. For many players, football is not simply a job, it is their identity, their livelihood, their purpose. To lose it in an instant is to lose the foundation upon which they have built their lives. Former running back Bo Jackson, though remembered as a two-sport legend, saw his NFL career cut short by a freak hip injury in 1991. The dislocation occurred in a seemingly routine tackle, but it destroyed the blood supply to his hip joint. Reflecting years later, Jackson admitted he never truly got over the abrupt end of football. "I was in denial for a long time," he confessed. "It wasn't supposed to happen to me." That sense of disbelief is common among athletes whose bodies betray them in a single moment. It is important to remember that the violence of collisions does not discriminate between stars and journeymen. For every Bo Jackson or Sterling Sharp, there are dozens of lesser-known players whose careers end quietly without headlines. A special teams player who blows out his knee in coverage. A backup lineman whose neck collapses under the weight of a pile. These men rarely make the news, but their lives are equally transformed. The NFL is filled with stories of players who disappear from rosters overnight, casualties of collisions the public never even notices. The ripple effect of these injuries extends far beyond the players themselves. Families bear the brunt of the aftermath. Wives and children watch as husbands and fathers struggle with pain, depression, and uncertainty about the future. Many players who suffer career-ending injuries face financial instability, especially if they never earn the massive contracts given to stars. The NFL is a league of short careers, and for most, the dream ends before financial security is established. A single collision can erase years of sacrifice, leaving behind medical bills and a fractured sense of identity. I recall reading the words of Troy Vincent, a former cornerback and now an NFL executive, who once said, "We prepare players for life on the field, but we've never done a good job preparing them for life after." His comment resonates most deeply with those whose careers end abruptly. Football teaches men how to hit, how to endure, how to sacrifice. But it does not teach them how to cope with sudden endings, with waking up one morning no longer a football player. The silence after a collision, the moment when the stadium holds its breath, is more than just concern for the injured player. It is a collective recognition that what we are watching is dangerous in ways we prefer not to admit. That silence speaks a truth louder than the cheers. Football-esque collisions can erase futures in an instant. And yet, the game goes on. The whistle blows, the trainers escort the player away, and the next snap resumes as though nothing happened. For fans, the moment becomes a memory. For the player, it becomes a lifelong reality. That dissonance, the gulf between spectacle and sufferings, at the heart of football's enduring contradiction. What strikes me most, as I reflect on these stories, is how often players look back, not with anger, but with acceptance. They knew the risks, even if they did not always understand the science. They embraced the game because it gave them purpose, community, and opportunity. But their acceptance should not absolve us from asking harder questions. Why must men sacrifice so much for our entertainment? Why must collisions dictate not just the length of careers, but the quality of entire lives afterward? The silence after a devastating hit is temporary, but the echoes of that silence reverberate for years in the lives of those who endure it. Each story sharp, Spielman, Brown, LeGrand, Jackson reminds us that behind every highlight lies the possibility of devastation. These are not just football injuries. They are human collisions, altering the trajectory of lives in ways that statistics and highlight reels will never capture. As we move forward, the narratives of players themselves must take center stage. It is not enough to analyze science or culture. We must listen to the voices of those who paid the price, who lived through the silence, who carried the consequences long after the game moved on. Their testimonies give us a window into the real cost of collisions, costs that cannot be measured in yards gained or games won. Because only through those voices can we truly understand the shadow side of football. The hidden stories that live in the silence after impact. When we talk about football collisions, the images that often surface are spectacular hits replayed endlessly on highlight reels. But behind every one of those moments exists another reality, one that doesn't make it to commercial breaks or viral clips. It is the reality of broken bodies, halted dreams, and men forced to reconcile with a sudden end they never imagined. To truly understand the story of career-ending hits, we must revisit the cases that shook not just the players involved, but the entire league. Take the story of Darryl Stingley. On August 12, 1978, during a preseason game between the New England Patriots and the Oakland Raiders, Stingley ran a slant route across the middle. Raiders safety Jack Tatum, known as the assassin for his punishing hits, collided with him helmet first. The crack of impact echoed through the stadium. Stingley collapsed, never to get up again. The hit fractured 2 of his vertebrae and left him a quadriplegic at just 26 years old. For the rest of his life, Stingley would live in a wheelchair, paralyzed from the chest down. His story became one of football's darkest symbols. At the time, Tatum was unapologetic, insisting it was part of the game. The league did not fine or suspend him. In that era, hits like Tatum's were celebrated as proof of toughness. But for Stingley, it was the end of everything he had built. In interviews years later, Stingley admitted the emotional pain cut even deeper than the physical. "You're stripped of who you are," he said. "You're stripped of what you worked your whole life for." His tragedy was not just personal, it forced the league and the public to reckon. At least briefly, with the catastrophic consequences of glorified violence. But Stingley's case was not unique. In 1991, Detroit Lions guard Mike Utley was injured in a game against the Los Angeles Rams. While blocking, his head struck awkwardly against an opponent's helmet. Utley collapsed, his body limp. Trainers rushed to his side. As he was carted off the field, Utley famously raised his right thumb to the crowd, a gesture of resilience in a moment of devastation. That would be his last play in the NFL. The injury left him paralyzed from the chest down. Years later, Utley reflected on that moment, saying, "Football was my life, and in 1 second, it was gone." Utley's story spread beyond football. His courage in the face of paralysis inspired fans across the country. But it also highlighted the brutality of a sport that could take away so much so suddenly. He became an advocate for spinal cord research, founding the Mike Utley Foundation. Yet, at its core, his injury was a reminder that the very thing fans celebrate, the explosive collision, can carry a price no player should be asked to pay. Then came Kevin Everett in 2007, a tight end for the Buffalo Bills. Everett suffered a catastrophic spinal cord injury on a kickoff against the Denver Broncos. Like Stingley and Utley before him, Everett lay motionless on the field. Doctors initially feared paralysis would be permanent, yet thanks to immediate and aggressive medical intervention, including the rapid infusion of cold saline to limit spinal damage, Everett regained partial movement and avoided total paralysis. His case became a rare story of hope in a landscape of despair, but it was also a warning. Without perfect timing and extraordinary care, the outcome could have been another lifelong tragedy. These stories illustrate something essential. Collisions in football are not random accidents. They are predictable consequences of a game that demands speed, force, and impact. The physics alone make this clear. Players today are bigger, faster, and stronger than ever. According to biomechanical studies, a single tackle can generate over 1,500 pounds of force, equivalent to a car crash at 30 miles per hour. When that force is delivered repeatedly, or to vulnerable parts of the body like the spine or head, the result is not just injury, but catastrophe. And while technology has advanced, helmets are stronger, medical teams are more sophisticated, the fundamental problem remains. Equipment cannot protect the spine from compression or twisting forces. No helmet can prevent the brain from slamming against the inside of the skull during a collision, as long as the sport demands speed and contact. Career-ending hits will remain a part of its DNA. The NFL has attempted reforms. In the wake of growing criticism, rules were introduced to penalize helmet-to-helmet contact, outlaw defenseless receiver hits, and protect quarterbacks from blindside blows. Concussion protocols became stricter, and awareness campaigns highlighted the risks of brain trauma. Yet critics argue that these measures, while well-intentioned, do little to address the core issue. Football itself is built on collisions. You can soften the edges, but you cannot remove the foundation. Players themselves live with this knowledge. Linebacker Chris Borland retired in 2015 after just one season with the San Francisco 49ers, citing concerns about head trauma. He explained, "I just don't think it's worth the risk." His decision shocked fans and analysts, but it revealed the quiet truth many players wrestle with: the awareness that one collision could not only end their careers, but alter their lives permanently. Still, for every Borland, there are hundreds who keep playing, either because the love of the game outweighs the fear, or because the financial stakes are too high to walk away. The NFL is a dream for many, and walking away voluntarily often feels impossible. That tension, the love of the game versus the reality of its risks, sits at the heart of every player's career. The most haunting aspect of career-ending hits is how sudden they are. One play is all it takes. A wrong angle, an awkward fall, a helmet striking at just the wrong place. Unlike gradual decline, which athletes can see coming, a catastrophic collision leaves no time for preparation. Careers vanish in seconds, and players are thrust into lives they never imagined. The psychological aftermath is as devastating as the physical. Studies show that players who suffer career-ending injuries face higher rates of depression, anxiety, and even suicidal thoughts. They lose not just income, but identity. As former Patriots offensive lineman Joe Andruzzi once put it, "You're part of a family, and suddenly, you're not anymore." The door closes, and you're left outside. That sense of abandonment is profound. And while some players find purpose after injury, Lee in advocacy, Everett in community outreach, LeGrand in motivational speaking, many others struggle in silence. They fade from the public eye, carrying the weight of collisions long after fans move on to the next season. Their lives become testaments to a truth the NFL has long avoided. Football is not just entertainment, it is a game of human sacrifice. Yet, for all its brutality, football remains beloved. Fans still fill stadiums, still wear jerseys of their heroes, still cheer the very hits that might one day end a career. The contradiction lies at the center of the sport, the beauty of its spectacle and the darkness of its cost. As I reflect on these stories, Stingley, Utley, Everett, and countless unnamed others, I cannot help but ask, how many more must there be before we confront the reality of what we are watching? How many more players must raise a thumb from a stretcher, or fail to get up at all, before the silence of the crowd becomes a permanent reckoning? Because the truth is unavoidable. Football is not just a game of yards and points. It is a game of collisions, each carrying the potential to rewrite a life forever. The stories behind career-ending hits are not side notes to the NFL's history. They are the foundation of it. And until we face that reality fully, the game will continue to carry a shadow as deep as its glory. Every generation of football produces its own unforgettable collisions, moments that etch themselves into the memory of fans and players alike. Some of these moments are celebrated, replayed as symbols of toughness. Others are buried, too painful to revisit. Reminders of just how fragile even the strongest bodies can be. To understand the true story of career-ending hits, we have to look at the continuum. From the biggest stars whose lights went out too soon, to the journeymen whose names we barely remember but whose sacrifices were no less severe. Bo Jackson is perhaps the most famous what-if. In NFL history, known as the greatest two-sport athlete of his era, Jackson seemed invincible. His speed was legendary, his power unmatched, and his highlight runs were nothing short of mythic. But on January 13, 1991, in an AFC playoff game against the Cincinnati Bengals, Jackson was tackled awkwardly. His hip popped out of its socket, a rare and devastating injury. At first, doctors thought it could be repaired, but the damage cut off blood supply to the joint, leading to a vascular necrosis. Jackson's football career was over, and his baseball career would never be the same. Reflecting later, Jackson admitted he had never considered such an abrupt ending. "I thought I was Superman," he said, "until I wasn't." His story revealed something fans often forget. Even the most gifted athletes are vulnerable to the violence of collisions. For Jackson, one routine tackle ended what could have been the greatest career in NFL history. Then there was Gale Sayers, whose story, while different, belongs in the same conversation. Sayers was not felled by a single catastrophic hit, but by repeated knee injuries sustained through violent collisions. His career, dazzling as it was, lasted only 7 seasons. He later said, "Give me 18 inches of daylight and I'll give you 6 points." But daylight wasn't enough against the grind of hits that wore his body down. Sayers' decline was proof that not all career-ending damage is sudden. Sometimes it comes slowly, the product of countless collisions that add up to a breaking point. These contrasting stories, Bo Jackson's sudden collapse and Gale Sayers' gradual decline, underscore the dual nature of football's danger. A career can vanish in a single moment, or it can erode over years of silent damage. Either way, the common thread is the collision. But perhaps no position illustrates this better than the quarterback. While quarterbacks are often protected by rules today, history is filled with examples of careers cut short by devastating hits. Joe Theismann's injury on November 18, 1985, remains one of the most infamous moments in NFL history. On a Monday Night Football game against the New York Giants, linebacker Lawrence Taylor burst through the line and sacked Theismann. The collision snapped Theismann's leg in two, a gruesome injury replayed countless times on television. Theismann never played another down. Years later, Theismann reflected, "It was over before I even knew it. One play, and everything I'd worked for was gone." That injury became a cultural touchstone, a reminder of the violence lurking in every snap. For fans, it was shocking. For players, it was a confirmation of what they already knew. No one is safe. Theismann's story also showed the psychological fallout. He admitted to struggling with depression and identity loss after leaving the game. When the cheering stops, he said, "You have to face who you are without football." His words echoed what countless others have felt in silence. But beyond the stars are players like Chris Hudson, a defensive back whose career ended not in a celebrated moment, but in obscurity. Hudson suffered a severe spinal injury in a routine collision during practice. He never returned to the field. His story didn't make headlines, but it mattered no less. The NFL is full of men like Hudson, athletes who dreamed, worked, and sacrificed, only to see it all vanish in one unlucky moment. These cases force us to ask a deeper question. Why do players accept the risks? The answer lies in culture and economics. Football is more than a sport, it's an identity. A pathway out of poverty for many, a chance to achieve glory and financial security. Players know the dangers, but the rewards seem worth it till the collision comes. And yet, the league itself has historically downplayed those dangers. For decades, the NFL ignored or minimized the long-term consequences of repeated collisions, especially concussions. The infamous Mild Traumatic Brain Injury Committee, formed by the league in the 1990s, published reports dismissing links between football and brain damage. Only after lawsuits and mounting scientific evidence did the NFL admit what players already knew in their bones. Collisions carried devastating consequences. Consider the testimony of Junior Seau's family after his suicide in 2012. So, Hall of Fame linebacker had suffered countless collisions over his career. An autopsy revealed he had chronic traumatic encephalopathy (CTE), a degenerative brain disease caused by repeated head trauma. His daughter Sydney said, "My dad loved football, but football killed my dad." Her words encapsulate the cruel paradox of the sport. It gives players purpose, wealth, and fame, but often takes away peace, health, and longevity. The ripple effects extend further than the individual. Families are often left to pick up the pieces. Wives become caregivers. Children grow up watching their fathers struggle with memory loss, mood swings, or physical disability. Financial strain adds another layer of hardship. For every player who makes millions, there are dozens who leave the game with little savings and mounting medical bills. The NFL has tried to address these realities with programs for retired players, concussion settlements, and medical benefits. But critics argue that the measures are too little, too late. For many, the damage is already irreversible. And while settlements provide money, they cannot restore mobility, erase brain damage, or bring back the sense of self lost in the collisions. This is why career-ending hits remain such powerful symbols. They cut through the glamour of the sport. They reveal football not just as a game of strategy and skill, but as a dangerous enterprise built on human sacrifice. Every player who lines up knows the risk. Every fan who cheers is complicit in celebrating it. And yet, the game endures. Part of football's allure is its violence. Fans may recoil from gruesome injuries, but they also demand intensity. Networks replay the biggest hits. Commentators celebrate bone-crushing tackles. The same culture that mourns a career-ending hit also fuels the demand for collisions that create them. This contradiction lies at the heart of football's ongoing tension with itself. As I reflect on the stories of Bo Jackson, Gale Sayers, Joe Theismann, and countless others, I am struck by a sobering realization. Football careers are built on borrowed time. Every collision brings the end closer. Some players defy the odds, playing for a decade or more. Others see it end in a single moment. But for all of them, the game eventually takes more than it gives. And perhaps that is why the stories of career-ending hits resonate so deeply. They are reminders of mortality, of fragility, of the truth that even the strongest are vulnerable. They force us to see football not just as entertainment, but as a human story, one of ambition, sacrifice, triumph, and tragedy. Because behind every collision is not just a player, but a person. A person with a family, with dreams, with a life beyond the field. A person who, in one instant, may see everything they built vanish into silence. The game moves on. The next snap, the next season, the next star. But for those left behind, the collision never ends. It reverberates through their bodies, their minds, and their lives forever. The true cost of career-ending collisions extends far beyond the field. For fans, it may appear as a brief moment of drama, an injured player being helped off the turf, but for the athletes themselves, those seconds can mark the end of an identity built over decades. Players spend their entire lives preparing for the NFL, often beginning as children in backyard games, progressing through high school and college with a singular focus: to play professionally, to have it end in an instant. From a single collision is a psychological blow as immense as the physical one. Consider the story of Sterling Sharpe, the Green Bay Packers wide receiver whose career was cut short by a neck injury. Sharpe had led the league in receptions for 3 consecutive seasons and seemed destined for the Hall of Fame. Then, during a routine game in 1994, A tackle caused a cervical spine injury that doctors warned could result in paralysis if he continued playing. Sharp's reaction was complex. He grieved his lost potential while acknowledging the reality that continuing could have destroyed his life entirely. It was a life-altering moment, he said years later. Football gave me everything, but it almost took everything away too. Sharp's story mirrors the experiences of countless players whose careers end abruptly. Chris Borland, a linebacker with the San Francisco 49ers, retired voluntarily after just one season, citing the cumulative impact of collisions on his brain. Borland's decision was unprecedented, particularly in a league that glorifies endurance through pain. "I want to live a long, healthy life," he explained, a sentiment that resonates with many retired athletes quietly navigating the aftermath of repeated trauma. Borland's choice highlighted a growing awareness. It is not just the visible, catastrophic hits that end careers. Repeated subconcussive collisions accumulate damage slowly but inexorably. The NFL has made some efforts to mitigate these dangers, but the culture of the sport complicates reform. Helmets and protective equipment have evolved. Rules against helmet-to-helmet contact have been instituted, and concussion protocols are now standard. Yet, despite these measures, the fundamental nature of football violent, high-speed collisions is unchanged. Physics will always dictate that when a 250-pound player traveling at 20 miles per hour meets another moving at a similar speed, bones will break, spines will compress, and brains will jolt. No amount of padding or protocol can make the body impervious. The human cost becomes even more pronounced when examining positions most exposed to collisions. Linebackers and defensive linemen absorb repeated impacts on nearly every play. Running backs carry the ball into concentrated contact, often taking hits from multiple angles. Wide receivers may be blindsided while leaping for a pass. Quarterbacks, despite rule protections, remain vulnerable to blindside sacks and awkward falls. Across every position, the risk of career-ending injury is omnipresent. Aaron Hernandez's story underscores the terrifying intersection of collision and neurological damage. Though Hernandez was known more for his off-field controversies, the autopsy after his death at age 27 revealed severe CTE, highlighting how repeated collisions, even over a relatively short professional career, can devastate the brain. Hernandez's life and actions, influenced in part by neurological trauma, illustrate that the consequences of collisions extend beyond the body. They infiltrate behavior, emotion, and cognition, with effects that ripple through families and communities. Beyond individual cases, the systemic reality of career-ending hits is reflected in statistics. A 2017 NFL Players Association study found that approximately 67% of former players report being diagnosed with a serious medical condition as a result of injuries sustained during their careers. More than 40% experience ongoing chronic pain. The physical toll is clear, but the psychological burden is equally alarming. Nearly half of retired players report experiencing depression, anxiety, or other mental health challenges directly tied to injuries. Career-ending collisions leave scars that endure long after the final whistle. One of the most powerful illustrations of this reality comes from Mike Utley, the Detroit Lions offensive lineman paralyzed in a 1991 game against the Los Angeles Rams. Utley's injury occurred during a routine blocking assignment, yet it permanently altered his life. In the immediate aftermath, his iconic thumbs-up gesture from the stretcher became a symbol of courage and determination. But Utley's life was forever changed. He faced not only physical paralysis, but the emotional and psychological struggle of redefining his identity outside of football. His story highlights that career-ending collisions are rarely about the single instant on the field. They are about the lifelong ramifications that follow. Another dimension of these injuries is the hidden epidemic of subconcussive trauma. Unlike catastrophic collisions, these are hits that may not cause immediate symptoms but accumulate over time, leading to chronic neurological conditions. Dr. Anne McKee, a leading neuropathologist studying former NFL players, has described these repeated hits as the slow erosion of the brain. She emphasizes that players may leave the field with no immediate signs of injury, only to face cognitive decline, depression, and behavioral changes decades later. Career-ending impacts are often silent, their effects delayed, and yet profoundly consequential. The psychological weight of career-ending hits is compounded by the sudden loss of identity. For many players, football is not just a profession, it's their self-concept. From early youth leagues to college and then the NFL, their lives are structured entirely around performance, training, and competition. When a career ends abruptly, players confront the daunting task of reconstructing an identity outside the sport. Many struggle to find purpose, financial stability, or even community support. As former players testify, this transition can be more difficult than the physical rehabilitation required to survive the initial injury. Families are also profoundly affected. Wives, parents, and children become caretakers, navigating both the medical and emotional consequences of career-ending injuries. The financial strain adds another layer, particularly for players whose careers ended before lucrative contracts could provide security. The NFL has implemented programs to assist with these transitions, but critics argue that these measures are insufficient given the scale of the problem. Career-ending hits are not just an individual tragedy, they are a social and familial one. It is worth reflecting on the paradoxical nature of these collisions. Football is a sport built on physical confrontation. The hits that enthrall fans and define careers are the very same hits that carry the potential to end them. The spectacle and danger are inseparable, creating a tension between admiration and anxiety. As fans, we are captivated by displays of strength, speed, and aggression. But each display carries risk, and the human cost is real, often devastating, and irrevocable. The culture of football further complicates the picture. Players are taught from a young age to play through pain, to value toughness above all else, and to accept collisions as part of the game. Risk-taking is rewarded. Caution is penalized. This cultural ethos, combined with the financial and social pressures to succeed, creates an environment where players may downplay injuries, return to play prematurely, and expose themselves to even more severe collisions. Career-ending hits are thus both a predictable outcome and a human tragedy, embedded within the very fabric of the sport. Medical interventions have improved over time, yet they cannot undo the damage. Spinal cord injuries, catastrophic fractures, and severe concussions often result in permanent consequences. Even with immediate medical care, the body may not recover fully. Rehabilitation can restore some function, but rarely the full capabilities required to return to professional football. Every collision carries a probability of career termination that cannot be eliminated entirely, no matter how sophisticated treatment becomes. Reflecting on these realities, it's clear that career-ending collisions are not anomalies. They are an inevitable consequence of a sport that celebrates impact. Players understand this risk, and yet they enter the game willingly, driven by passion, ambition, and opportunity. Their willingness to engage with such danger speaks to the unique combination of courage and vulnerability inherent in professional football. The stories of players like Sterling Sharp, Bo Jackson, Joe Theismann, Mike Utley, and Chris Borland reveal both the extraordinary potential and the fragile nature of human athleticism. Each collision represents a turning point, a moment when glory and disaster intersect. These moments are simultaneously celebrated and mourned, public spectacle and private tragedy. And they illuminate the duality of football itself, a game of breathtaking achievement shadowed by profound risk. As I look at these narratives collectively, the patterns are clear. Career-ending collisions are a product of biology, physics, culture, and economics. They are the inevitable result of a game that pushes human bodies to extremes. They are moments where speed, mass, and force converge to create consequences that are immediate, visible, and sometimes lifelong. And perhaps most importantly, They are human stories of loss, resilience, adaptation, and courage in the face of overwhelming odds. Understanding career-ending collisions requires empathy as well as analysis. It demands that we listen to players, examine data, and confront the uncomfortable truth that the sport we celebrate carries real, measurable costs. Only by engaging with these realities can we fully appreciate the courage it takes to step onto the field. The stakes involved in every play and the silent toll that follows when a career abruptly ends. In the stories of career-ending collisions, there is a common thread that unites them all: unpredictability. No player steps onto the field expecting to be the next statistic. Yet every snap carries the potential to end a career in an instant. Some hits are textbook perfectly executed tackles that happen to strike just the wrong place at just the wrong angle. Others are freak accidents, collisions that defy expectation and leave both fans and players in stunned disbelief. The randomness of it all is part of what makes these stories so haunting. Take the case of Sterling Sharpe, whose neck injury ended a career that was nothing short of extraordinary. Sharpe had dominated the NFL, setting records and redefining the role of the wide receiver. Yet one game, one tackle, changed everything. What makes it tragic is not just the abruptness, but the fact that it came in the course of a play he executed perfectly. There was no recklessness, no misjudgment, only the cruel reality that football collisions can end the careers of the most skilled and careful players. Sharpe later admitted, "You never think it will happen to you, until it does, and then it's all you can think about." His reflection captures the shock and disbelief that pervades the experiences of all players whose careers are cut short. Then there's Joe Theismann, whose broken leg on Monday Night Football has become one of the most replayed images in NFL history. Theismann was in peak form, leading his team with precision and experience, when Lawrence Taylor's tackle obliterated not just his leg, but the trajectory of his career. In that instant, the public witnessed the horror of a collision, but few understood the deeper, long-term consequences. Theismann was forced to redefine himself, moving from athlete to commentator, from the center of the stadium to the sidelines of life. In interviews, he has described the psychological toll of leaving a game he loved. You spend your whole life preparing for this, and 1 second can erase it all. It's not just physical, it's who you are. Physical trauma, of course, is only one part of the story. Concussions, subconcussive hits, and repetitive head trauma contribute to cognitive decline, memory loss, and emotional instability. Players may continue to perform at high levels even as their brains accumulate damage. Chris Borland, who retired after a single season due to concerns about long-term neurological health, brought national attention to this issue. He noted that even plays that do not result in visible injury can have lasting consequences. Every collision, every tackle, every impact has a cost. The brain remembers what the body doesn't always show. Borland's warning underscores the fact that career-ending collisions are not always visible or instantaneous. Sometimes they are insidious, accumulating silently until a breaking point is reached. Spinal injuries, on the other hand, tend to be immediate and catastrophic. Mike Utley's paralysis in 1991 provides a stark example. A routine blocking assignment ended with his body crushed under the weight of a pile. The stadium fell silent as the medical staff rushed in, and Utley's iconic thumbs up from the stretcher became a symbol of courage in the face of disaster. Yet, behind that symbol lay the reality of lifelong paralysis. The psychological adjustment to a new reality, and the profound ripple effects for family, finances, and identity. Career-ending collisions like Utley's illustrate that even players at the highest professional levels are vulnerable to moments that redefine their existence. The NFL has long grappled with how to balance the sport's inherent violence with player safety. Rules against helmet-to-helmet contact, defenseless receiver hits, and blindside hits have been introduced to mitigate risks. Helmet technology has advanced, and concussion protocols are now standardized. Yet these measures, while important, cannot eliminate the physics of the game. A player traveling at 20 miles per hour will produce over a ton of force upon collision. The human body, no matter how well trained or protected, can only absorb so much. The inevitability of injury, including career-ending collisions, remains embedded in the sport itself. Off-field consequences also define these collisions. Families of injured players often face emotional and financial turmoil. Wives and partners frequently become primary caregivers, adjusting careers and personal lives to accommodate new responsibilities. Children grow up witnessing the physical and emotional struggles of a parent whose career ended abruptly. Financial pressures can mount, particularly for those whose careers ended before securing significant earnings. Programs exist to support retired players, but they often fall short of addressing the full scope of impact. For many, career-ending collisions are not a temporary setback. They are a permanent transformation of life circumstances. The mental health implications are equally profound. Studies show that former NFL players who suffer career-ending injuries are at higher risk for depression, anxiety, and suicidal ideation. The sudden loss of purpose, structure, and identity contributes to psychological distress. Players like Joe Theismann and Sterling Sharp have spoken candidly about the emotional struggle of leaving the game, emphasizing that the end of a career is more than a physical injury, it is a crisis of self. The intersection of physical trauma and psychological adjustment makes career-ending collisions uniquely devastating, affecting both the body and the mind. Yet, amid these tragedies, stories of resilience emerge. Eric LeGrand, paralyzed while playing for Rutgers in 2010, defied expectations by regaining partial mobility and becoming a motivational figure. Mike Utley, despite paralysis, founded the Mike Utley Foundation to advance spinal cord injury research. These examples show that while career-ending collisions may take away physical ability, they do not erase human spirit. Players find ways to adapt, inspire, and contribute, transforming personal tragedy into broader purpose. The cultural implications of these collisions are also significant. Fans are captivated by the spectacle of impact, yet often overlook the human cost. Highlight reels glorify bone-crushing tackles while rarely acknowledging the players who never return to the field. The NFL, as a commercial enterprise, thrives on intensity, speed, and collision, creating an environment where the extraordinary and the dangerous coexist. This tension between admiration for athletic prowess and awareness of human vulnerability defines the modern understanding of career-ending hits. In reflecting on the stories of Sharp, Jackson, Theismann, Utley, and Borland, a pattern emerges. Football careers exist in a state of constant risk. Every snap, every tackle, every collision carries potential consequences. Some players survive unscathed, while others face sudden or cumulative career-ending injuries. The variability is both unpredictable and inevitable, a reminder that the sport's very nature demands sacrifice, and the sacrifice extends beyond the individual. Families, communities, and even fans are affected. Witnessing a beloved player carted off the field is jarring, but understanding the long-term consequences reveals a deeper narrative. Career-ending collisions are rarely isolated events. They are part of a continuum of human cost that runs throughout the league. The impact reverberates socially, emotionally, and economically, illustrating that the price of football extends far beyond the stadium. Ultimately, these collisions demand reflection. They expose the inherent contradictions of football, a game celebrated for physicality yet inherently dangerous, a source of fame and wealth yet capable of instantaneous loss, a stage for achievement yet fraught with vulnerability. Understanding career-ending hits requires acknowledging both the spectacle and the human reality. It is a reminder that behind every celebrated play, behind every touchdown, there is a risk that can alter, end, or define a life in a single moment. The stories of these players serve as both cautionary tales and testaments to resilience. They remind us that career-ending collisions are not mere accidents. They are foreseeable consequences of a sport built on force, speed, and human vulnerability. They challenge us to consider the balance between admiration for athleticism and awareness of the human cost. They compel us to hear the voices of those who have experienced loss firsthand and to understand the gravity of what happens when a career ends in a single collision. As I reflect on these narratives, one theme emerges above all. Football is more than a game of skill, strategy, and entertainment. It is a game of human collisions where the glory of the sport is inseparable from its potential for devastation. The stories of players who have endured career-ending hits are not just footnotes. They are central to understanding the game as reality, its culture, and its cost. When we examine the stories of career-ending collisions, one thing becomes painfully clear. The moments themselves are only the beginning. The true story begins after the whistle blows. When the lights dim, the crowd disperses, and the player is left to face a life forever changed. These collisions are rarely isolated. They ripple outward, touching families, communities, and the psyche of every player who witnesses them. Every time a career ends abruptly, a microcosm of human vulnerability is exposed in the most public of arenas. Consider the case of Alex Smith. While he would eventually return to play after a catastrophic leg injury, the severity of the collision illustrates the fine line between survival and career ending.
Catastrophe.
In 2018, during a game against the Houston Texans, Smith suffered a compound fracture in his tibia and fibula. The injury was gruesome, life-threatening, and initially considered potentially career-ending. Multiple surgeries, infections, and months of rehabilitation followed. Smith's return to the NFL after 17 months was hailed as miraculous. Yet it also underscores the brutal reality of collisions. A split-second event can redefine a life. The stakes are enormous, the margin for error infinitesimal. Physical trauma, while often the most visible, is intertwined with mental and emotional consequences. Players like Alex Smith experience profound psychological challenges: fear of re-injury, anxiety about performance, and the stress of uncertainty. The identity crisis is acute. Athletes spend decades defining themselves through sport, and when that avenue is blocked or destroyed, the loss is existential. The transition from NFL star to patient, from competitor to survivor, is as taxing as the rehabilitation itself. For many, this mental recovery is the longer, harder battle. Then there are the players whose careers end invisibly, without dramatic highlights or public attention. Offensive linemen, for instance, may suffer cumulative spinal injuries over years of play. These injuries often manifest later in chronic pain, numbness, or mobility issues, leaving players unable to perform at the level required for the NFL. Their stories are less dramatic, but no less tragic. They illustrate that career-ending collisions are not always sudden. Some emerge slowly, insidiously, until the body finally breaks under repeated stress. Take the story of Ryan Shazier, a linebacker whose spinal injury in 2017 left him temporarily paralyzed. Shazier's injury occurred during a routine tackle, a play that, under normal circumstances, would have been unremarkable. Yet one collision altered everything. The recovery process was grueling. Physical therapy, adaptive training, and relentless mental resilience. While Shazier regained partial mobility and remains active in football communities, the incident ended his professional career. His journey highlights the duality of hope and loss, the rare possibility of recovery paired with the certainty that a career has been cut short. The human cost of these collisions extends beyond the individual. Families experience profound disruption, adjusting to new realities in caregiving, finances, and emotional support. Children witness the transformation of a parent from athlete to patient, learning early the fragility of human capability. Wives and partners navigate dual roles of emotional support and practical management, often at significant personal sacrifice. Career-ending hits are not solitary tragedies. They reverberate through households, reshaping lives in ways the public seldom sees. Culturally, These collisions force the NFL and fans to confront uncomfortable truths. Football is marketed as the pinnacle of toughness, strategy, and athleticism, yet it is inseparable from the risks it poses. Highlight reels glorify bone-crushing hits while glossing over the consequences. Fans cheer the intensity without always understanding the human cost. The sport exists in a paradox. Celebrated for its physicality, yet defined by the real dangers inherent in that physicality. Career-ending collisions strip away the illusion, revealing a raw and unavoidable reality. The financial dimension cannot be ignored. Many players lose not only their careers, but also anticipated earnings and endorsements. The sudden cessation of income paired with mounting medical bills creates immense pressure. NFL programs aim to mitigate these consequences, offering pensions, medical coverage, and support networks, but the efficacy is inconsistent. For some players, especially those whose careers end before achieving financial security, the aftermath is a landscape of economic uncertainty, layered atop physical and emotional trauma. Psychologically, the impact is profound. Depression, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress are common among athletes whose careers end abruptly. The sudden loss of identity and purpose can exacerbate pre-existing vulnerabilities. Studies show that retired NFL players who suffered career-ending injuries are significantly more likely to report mental health challenges than peers who retired voluntarily. The loss of the game central to their sense of self creates a vacuum that is difficult to fill. The collision may be physical, but its echoes resonate through mind and spirit. Chronic traumatic encephalopathy, CTE, further complicates the narrative. Research has shown that repeated collisions, even those not immediately career-ending, contribute to degenerative brain conditions. Junior Seau's posthumous diagnosis of CTE revealed the silent, cumulative cost of a football career built on collisions. The emotional instability, impulsivity, and cognitive decline linked to CTE illustrate that career-ending impacts are not always visible on the field. Some athletes leave the sport still seemingly intact, only to face debilitating neurological consequences years later. Yet amid tragedy, resilience emerges. Players who endure career-ending collisions often channel their experiences into advocacy, coaching, or motivational work. Mike Utley, paralyzed during his career, founded the Mike Utley Foundation to advance spinal cord research and provide resources for injured athletes. Eric LeGrand, paralyzed while playing for Rutgers, became a motivational speaker and mentor. Their stories highlight the human capacity to transform trauma into purpose. Finding meaning in lives forever, altered by collisions. These narratives also illuminate the inherent tension of football. The sport thrives on collisions. They are central to its strategy and spectacle. Yet those same collisions can end careers, shatter bodies, and alter minds. Fans, commentators, and networks celebrate force and aggression, while the human cost remains largely hidden. This tension defines the modern understanding of career-ending hits, forcing both the league and the audience to grapple with ethical and emotional complexities. Consider the contrast between sudden, dramatic injuries and cumulative, silent damage. Bo Jackson's hip injury represents the shock of instant career termination, while repeated subconcussive hits illustrate the invisible erosion of ability over time. Both narratives underscore the fragility of athletic careers and the narrow margin separating triumph from tragedy. The same field, the same rules, the same game can produce vastly different outcomes, yet all carry inherent risk. For players, awareness of these risks is constant. Chris Borland's decision to retire early exemplifies a growing recognition of the stakes. He voluntarily walked away from the game to preserve long-term health, challenging the prevailing ethos that valorizes endurance at all costs. Borland's choice was controversial, even vilified by some commentators. Yet it highlighted the fundamental reality. Every snap carries risk, and the consequences extend far beyond the scoreboard. The interplay of physical, emotional, and social factors makes career-ending collisions complex. They are not merely medical events. They are life events, shaping futures in unpredictable ways. Families adjust, communities witness, and players themselves must reconstruct identity and purpose. Even with medical intervention, rehabilitation, and league support, the aftermath is rarely simple. These collisions reveal the human cost embedded in a game celebrated for its spectacle and intensity. Ultimately, career-ending collisions are both inevitable and instructive. They expose the limits of human resilience, the fragility of professional sports, and the deep consequences of a culture that celebrates physical dominance. They compel reflection on ethics, safety, and responsibility both for the league that organizes the game and the fans who consume it. Behind the highlight reels and statistics are human lives, forever altered by moments that last only seconds. As I reflect on the cumulative narratives of Sterling Sharp, Bo Jackson, Joe Theismann, Alex Smith, Mike Utley, and countless others, a profound truth emerges. Football is not just a contest of skill or strategy. It is a collision sport in the truest sense, where human bodies bear the brunt of its intensity. Every career-ending hit tells a story of vulnerability, resilience, and adaptation. Each is a reminder of the human stakes hidden behind the glamour of professional athletics. Understanding these collisions requires empathy, analysis, and attention to the human element. It demands that we listen to players, acknowledge the risks, and consider the long-term consequences of a sport built on impact. Career-ending collisions are not anomalies. They are an inevitable outcome of football's physical demands. Yet within this reality, there is also the enduring narrative of courage, recovery, and transformation, demonstrating the remarkable capacity of the human spirit to confront adversity. Every player who has faced a career-ending collision knows, deep down, that it is not just a physical event, it is a moment that defines the rest of their life. It is a pivot point where ambition, identity, and physical ability collide with the unforgiving realities of human fragility. These collisions can happen anywhere, during a primetime game, in a routine practice, or on what seems like a perfectly ordinary play. And yet, in a single second, they can rewrite the entire trajectory of an athlete's life. Consider the story of Dennis Byrd, a defensive end for the New York Jets. On November 29, 1992, Byrd collided with a teammate while attempting to sack the quarterback. The impact fractured his cervical vertebra, leaving him paralyzed from the neck down. In that instant, a promising career and a life built around football were forever altered. Yet what struck the public and remains instructive decades later was Byrd's resilience. Though his career ended abruptly, Byrd refused to let paralysis define him. Through years of rehabilitation, he regained some mobility, eventually walking with the aid of leg braces and a cane. His story highlights that while career-ending collisions devastate physical ability, they do not necessarily extinguish spirit. Byrd's story is particularly compelling because it illustrates the dual nature of career-ending hits, immediate devastation and long-term consequences. Physical trauma is obvious, often requiring surgery, rehabilitation, and adaptation. But the psychological and emotional toll is equally severe. Byrd described the moment of collision as a sudden, surreal experience. "I remember thinking, this is it. It is over," he said in later interviews. The realization that one's entire career and much of one's identity can vanish in an instant is a psychological burden few, outside professional sports, can truly comprehend. In contrast, consider the experience of running backs like Lendale White or Marcus Lattimore, whose repeated collisions eroded their physical capabilities over time. Lattimore, a promising college star, suffered multiple knee injuries that ultimately prevented him from achieving his potential in the NFL. Unlike Byrd, whose collision was sudden and catastrophic, Lattimore's injuries were cumulative, a slow, grinding destruction of the joints and ligaments critical to his position. In both cases, instant and cumulative, the end result is the same: a career that cannot continue. A future rewritten by forces beyond control. The NFL's history is filled with similar narratives. Bo Jackson's hip injury. Joe Theismann's shattered leg, and Sterling Sharp's neck injury all exemplify the inherent unpredictability of career-ending collisions. Some injuries are dramatic and public. Others are gradual and invisible. Yet all share a common thread: the collision itself, a violent intersection of mass. Speed and human vulnerability is the ultimate equalizer. No amount of talent, preparation, or athleticism can fully protect against it. This is especially true for positions like linebackers and defensive linemen, where repeated collisions are unavoidable. The very nature of the game requires absorbing and delivering force on nearly every play. Players in these positions often face career-ending injuries not from a single hit, but from the accumulation of subconcussive trauma over multiple seasons. Dr. Ann McKee, a leading neuropathologist studying retired NFL players, emphasizes that repetitive low-level impacts are often just as dangerous as dramatic, high-speed collisions. Chronic traumatic encephalopathy, CTE, memory loss, and mood disorders are common outcomes, even in players who appear healthy at the time of retirement. Career-ending collisions also reveal the limitations of medical intervention. While advances in surgery, rehabilitation, and protective equipment have improved outcomes, they cannot restore a player to pre-injury condition in all cases. Spinal cord injuries, ligament tears, and severe concussions often have permanent consequences. Players like Mike Utley, paralyzed in 1991, and Alex Smith, who endured a catastrophic leg injury, demonstrate both the promise of medical intervention and the stark reality of human limitation. Even with the best care, the body can only absorb so much. The cultural and financial pressures of football further complicate the narrative. Players are often encouraged, explicitly or implicitly, to play through pain, to risk additional injury, and to prioritize team success over personal health. This ethos has contributed to a climate where career-ending collisions are not only inevitable, but, in some ways, normalized. The stories of those who walk away like Chris Borland highlight the tension between individual health and the collective culture of the sport. Borland's decision to retire after one season, citing long-term neurological risk, challenged prevailing norms and brought national attention to the unseen dangers of repeated collisions. The emotional ramifications extend beyond the players themselves. Families often experience profound disruption. Wives and partners become primary caregivers, adjusting their lives to accommodate medical needs, mobility challenges, and emotional support. Children grow up witnessing the transformation of a parent from athlete to patient, learning early lessons about vulnerability, resilience, and identity. Even for fans, career-ending collisions can provoke collective grief, as favorite players are suddenly removed from the narrative of games and seasons. These hits are not isolated events. They ripple outward, affecting communities, institutions, and the cultural perception of the sport. The NFL has attempted to address these challenges with concussion protocols, rule changes, and retirement support programs. Yet critics argue that these measures are often reactive rather than preventive, insufficient to fully mitigate the risks. Helmets, padding, and medical oversight can reduce the severity of injuries, but cannot eliminate them. The game's inherent physicality, speed, mass, and collision remains unchanged. Players accept these risks because football offers not only fame and financial reward, but identity, purpose, and meaning. The collision is both a risk and a rite of passage, celebrated and feared simultaneously. Psychologically, the aftermath of career-ending collisions can be devastating. Athletes often face depression, anxiety, and a sense of lost purpose. Joe Theismann, after his leg injury, described the struggle of adjusting to life beyond football. You spend your whole life preparing for this. It's 1 second can erase it all. It's not just physical, it's who you are. These words resonate across generations of players whose careers ended abruptly, illustrating the deep emotional consequences of a single collision. Chronic traumatic encephalopathy, CTE, further complicates the narrative. Junior So, one of the NFL's most celebrated linebackers, was posthumously diagnosed with severe CTE, revealing how repeated collisions can silently erode neurological health. So's tragic death by suicide highlighted the link between repeated impact, brain disease, and emotional instability. His story forces the league, fans, and players to confront the hidden costs of a game built on collisions. Despite the physical and psychological toll, stories of resilience and adaptation emerge. Players who endure career-ending collisions often channel their experiences into advocacy, mentorship, or coaching. Mike Utley, paralyzed during his career, founded the Mike Utley Foundation to advance spinal cord injury research. Eric Legrand, paralyzed while playing at Rutgers, became a motivational speaker and mentor for young athletes. Their stories reveal the human capacity to transform tragedy into purpose, demonstrating that even when careers end, influence and inspiration can endure. The societal implications are also significant. Fans are captivated by the spectacle of impact, yet often overlook the human cost behind it. Highlight reels glorify bone-crushing tackles, while the long-term consequences, paralysis, chronic pain, CTE, remain largely invisible. The NFL thrives on collision, creating a paradox where admiration for athleticism coexists with awareness of potential devastation. Career-ending hits serve as both a warning and a testament, highlighting the precarious balance between glory and consequence. The unpredictability of collisions is another defining characteristic. Some are sudden and catastrophic, like Mike Utley's or Joe Theismann's injuries. Others are cumulative, like the degenerative effects experienced by linebackers and running backs over time. Yet in every case, the collision is the pivot, the fulcrum on which careers, identities, and lives are balanced. Players live with this uncertainty every time they step onto the field, understanding that control is limited and consequences can be profound. In reflecting on these stories, one truth stands out. Football is a collision sport, and collisions come with both glory and cost. The moments that define careers, inspire fans, and generate headlines are inseparable from the risks that can end those same careers in seconds. Every player who lines up knows this, and yet the allure of the game, the chance to achieve greatness, often outweighs the dangers. The sport exists in tension, a dance between aspiration and vulnerability, courage and fragility. Career-ending collisions expose the limits of human resilience and the narrow line between triumph and tragedy. They remind us that behind every celebrated play is a human body absorbing enormous force, a brain experiencing trauma, and a life that may be irrevocably altered. They demand reflection, empathy, and analysis, challenging fans, institutions, and players alike to consider the human cost embedded within the spectacle. The cumulative weight of these narratives: Dennis, Bird, Alex Smith, Bo Jackson, Sterling Sharp, Mike Utley, Chris Borland, Jr. reveals a central paradox. Football is both a celebration of human strength and a reminder of human vulnerability. The collision is the focal point of this paradox, a moment where skill, preparation, and courage intersect with unpredictability, physics, and mortality. Ultimately, career-ending hits are more than injuries. They are transformative events that redefine identity, purpose, and life itself. They challenge our understanding of athleticism, resilience, and the cost of a sport built on force. Every collision, every sudden end, is a human story, a lesson in vulnerability, and a testament to the courage it takes to step onto the field knowing the risks. These stories compel us to reflect not only on the players, but also on the system that places them in harm's way. They highlight the need for awareness, preparation, and support, even as the culture of the game continues to celebrate impact. Career-ending collisions are a stark reminder that in the NFL, the glory of the game is inseparable from its danger. As we move forward, the challenge becomes how to honor both the spectacle of football and the human lives on which it depends. The stories of these athletes remind us that every snap carries stakes far beyond the scoreboard. Behind the cheers and highlights are human beings, whose careers end, Sometimes lives are defined by collisions that last only seconds, but echo forever. In the world of the NFL, the line between triumph and tragedy is thinner than most fans realize. Every game, every play, every collision carries the potential to end a career, in some cases, change a life forever. The unpredictability of these moments is a constant shadow over every player, a tension that defines professional football at its most visceral level. Career-ending hits are the starkest manifestation of that reality, crystallizing the risks inherent in a sport celebrated for its speed, strength, and intensity. Bo Jackson's hip injury is often cited as one of the most infamous examples. At the time, Jackson was at the peak of his athletic prowess, a two-sport superstar with seemingly unlimited potential. In a single moment, however, a tackle during an NFL playoff game shattered his hip and ended his football career. The physical pain was immense, but the psychological shock was equally profound. Jackson was suddenly forced to confront a reality he had spent decades preparing to avoid. It was surreal, he later reflected. One moment, you're invincible. The next, everything changes. His experience encapsulates the abrupt, unpredictable nature of career-ending collisions, where skill and preparation offer no guarantee against disaster. Thiesmann's leg injury provides another stark example. On national television, millions of fans witnessed his leg twist unnaturally under the weight of a sack. The audible crack, the stunned silence, and the immediate medical response told a story of devastation in real time. Beyond the dramatic spectacle, Thiesmann's injury underscored a harsh truth. Professional athletes operate at the edge of physical possibility, and when the body fails, the consequences are immediate and irreversible. It was a life-changing moment, Thiesmann later said. Not just my career, was everything I had worked for. Yet not all career-ending hits are as public or visually dramatic. Many occur slowly, the result of repetitive trauma that erodes the body over time. Linemen, linebackers, and running backs absorb repeated impacts play after play, season after season. The cumulative effect of these collisions can lead to degenerative joint conditions, chronic pain, and neurological disorders, even when no single incident appears catastrophic. Chris Borland's voluntary retirement after one season brought this issue into sharp focus. He walked away not because of a single injury, but because he recognized the long-term risks of repeated collisions. Every hit matters, Borland said. It adds up, and eventually, it catches up with you. His decision challenged the league's culture of enduring pain and highlighted the invisible toll career-ending collisions can exact over time. Spinal injuries represent some of the most dramatic and life-altering outcomes. Mike Utley's paralysis during a 1991 Lions game remains one of the most iconic examples. A routine play, something most players execute thousands of times, ended with Utley crushed under a pile of bodies. The visible consequences were immediate, yet the long-term impact extended far beyond physical limitations. Utley's life was reshaped entirely, his identity as a professional athlete replaced by the challenge of navigating life with paralysis. His iconic thumbs-up gesture became a symbol of resilience, but the reality behind it reflected years of adaptation, struggle, and emotional resilience. Career-ending collisions are rarely just medical emergencies. They are life-altering events that demand psychological and social adjustment as much as physical recovery. Neurological trauma complicates the picture further. Repeated collisions, even when not immediately disabling, contribute to conditions like chronic traumatic encephalopathy (CTE). Junior So's story illustrates this tragic intersection. Posthumously diagnosed with severe CTE, So's life ended in suicide, underscoring the delayed, insidious effects of repeated impact. Unlike spinal or musculoskeletal injuries, which are immediately apparent, neurological damage often develops silently, manifesting years after a career ends. It is a reminder that the human cost of collisions extends far beyond the field, affecting cognition, behavior, and emotional stability long after the applause has faded. Families are intimately affected by these injuries. Spouses, parents, and children navigate the aftermath, often assuming roles as caregivers and emotional anchors. Financial strain, coupled with emotional stress, creates a complex and enduring burden. The player may face chronic pain, cognitive decline, or permanent disability, while family members adjust their lives to support recovery and adaptation. Career-ending collisions do not just remove a player from the field, they alter entire household dynamics, creating ripple effects that last decades. Financial ramifications are another hidden layer. Players often lose anticipated earnings, endorsements, and career advancement opportunities. Even with league support programs and pensions, the sudden cessation of income can strain families and limit post-career options. Injuries that end careers prematurely compound these challenges, leaving athletes to navigate both medical and financial recovery simultaneously. The combination of physical, emotional, and economic consequences makes career-ending collisions uniquely devastating. The culture of football amplifies the risk and impact of these collisions. Players are often encouraged to play through pain, to prioritize the team over personal health, and to downplay injuries. This ethos can exacerbate the physical and psychological consequences of collisions, leaving athletes vulnerable to both immediate and cumulative damage. Yet it also explains the persistence, courage, and commitment required to succeed in the NFL. Career-ending hits occur within a context that glorifies endurance, resilience, and aggression, making the choice to leave the field voluntarily like Chris Borland did both culturally and personally significant. Medical interventions, while increasingly advanced, have limits. Surgeries, rehabilitation programs, and protective equipment can mitigate but not eliminate risk. Spinal injuries, ligament tears, and severe concussions may permanently compromise a player's ability to compete. Even with successful interventions, full recovery is often impossible, and the risk of long-term disability remains. The body is finite, and the forces in professional football are immense, often exceeding the threshold of what human tissue can tolerate. Career-ending collisions are, therefore, a combination of biological limits and the unrelenting physicality of the sport. Psychologically, the aftermath can be profound. Depression, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress are common among athletes whose careers end abruptly. Losing the structure, identity, and purpose provided by football can be destabilizing. Joe Theismann's reflections capture this reality. You spend your whole life preparing for this, and 1 second can erase it all. It's not just physical, it's who you are. The collision may last only a moment, but the emotional consequences endure for years, shaping both personal and professional identity. The long-term impact of repeated collisions adds another layer of complexity. Even players who avoid catastrophic injuries may develop chronic conditions, including joint degeneration, neurological decline, and cognitive impairments. The cumulative toll is often invisible, manifesting gradually and complicating retirement and post-career life. Dr. Ann McKee emphasizes that repeated subconcussive impacts can be as damaging as single catastrophic collisions, contributing to mood disorders, memory loss, and behavioral changes. Career-ending collisions, therefore, exist on a spectrum, ranging from immediate, dramatic injury to silent, progressive trauma. Resilience and adaptation, however, are recurring themes. Players like Mike Utley, Eric LeGrand, and Dennis Bird transformed personal tragedy into advocacy and mentorship. They channeled the experience of career-ending injuries into meaningful work, influencing medical research, public awareness, and young athletes' development. Their stories demonstrate that while collisions may end careers, they do not erase human purpose or potential. These narratives of adaptation reveal the complex interplay between vulnerability, courage, and opportunity in the aftermath of life-altering hits. The cultural and ethical dimensions of career-ending collisions are profound. Fans are captivated by collisions and highlight-reel tackles, yet rarely consider the human cost. The NFL thrives on the spectacle of impact, creating a tension between entertainment and empathy. Every collision carries risk, and the league must navigate the challenge of preserving the sport's intensity while addressing player safety. Ethical considerations emerge not only in rulemaking and equipment standards, but also in how fans, media, and institutions value human life relative to the spectacle of the game. Every career-ending collision is a reminder of human fragility. Sterling Sharp, Bo Jackson, Joe Theismann, Alex Smith, Mike Utley, Chris Borland, and countless others illustrate that despite preparation, skill, and resilience, professional athletes remain vulnerable. The risk is inherent, the consequences profound, and the outcomes unpredictable. Football is not merely a contest of talent or strategy. It is a sport where human bodies endure repeated, often extreme, stress sometimes at the cost of lifelong health and identity. Understanding these collisions requires empathy and analysis. It demands recognition of the physical, psychological, and social dimensions of injury. It compels fans and institutions to consider the broader impact of the sport, from the immediate aftermath of a hit to the long-term consequences of repeated trauma. Career-ending collisions are not isolated events, they are systemic, reflecting the realities of a game built on human collision. Ultimately, the stories of these players highlight the paradox at the heart of football. It is a game that celebrates physical achievement, while simultaneously exposing participants to profound risk. Career-ending hits exemplify this duality, revealing both the extraordinary resilience of athletes and the limits of human capacity. Every collision is a testament to the stakes of the sport, a reminder of the courage required to step onto the field, and a window into the human cost hidden behind the spectacle of professional football. In reflecting on these narratives, one truth stands out. Career-ending collisions are more than medical events. They are life events. They challenge identity, test resilience, and redefine the trajectory of a player's life. They ripple outward, affecting families, communities, and the culture of the sport itself. And while they often leave visible scars, the invisible consequences, emotional, psychological, and cognitive, can be just as enduring. The NFL, fans, and players alike must grapple with this reality. Career-ending collisions are not anomalies. They are an inherent risk of a game that combines speed, mass, and human fragility. The challenge lies not only in preventing injury, but in understanding and responding to its consequences with empathy, foresight, and responsibility. These collisions demand that we appreciate the courage of those who play, the complexity of the sport, and the human cost embedded in every snap, tackle, and hit. In the end, the narrative of career-ending collisions is one of both caution and admiration. It is a story of human vulnerability and resilience, of lives redirected by moments of impact that last only seconds. It challenges our perception of the game, urging us to look beyond statistics and highlight reels to see the people behind the helmets, the families affected, and the invisible aftermath that unfolds long after the crowd has gone silent. Career-ending collisions often arrive without warning, yet their effects echo for a lifetime. They do not merely remove a player from the field. They redefine identity, alter relationships, and challenge every aspect of life built around the sport. The physical impact is immediate, sometimes visible in a single, horrifying moment. But the psychological and social consequences unfold over years. The narratives of players who have experienced these collisions are both cautionary and inspiring, a testament to human vulnerability and resilience. Take the story of Sterling Sharp once more. A wide receiver for the Green Bay Packers, Sharp was in his prime, dominating defenses, breaking records, and redefining what it meant to excel at his position. Then came the neck injury that ended it all. Unlike some injuries that occur from reckless behavior or misjudged plays, Sharp's was a cruel twist of fate. He executed his route perfectly, absorbed a textbook hit, and felt a sudden, searing pain. The realization hit quickly. His career, his dream, his identity as a football player was over. "You never think it will happen to you," Sharp later reflected. "Until it does, and then it's all you can think about. That reflection captures the psychological shock of career-ending collisions, the abrupt confrontation with vulnerability and mortality in a sport that prizes toughness. Thiesmann's broken leg, immortalized on Monday Night Football, offers another lens into the brutal reality of a career-ending hit. Millions of viewers saw the violent twist, the immediate fall, the stunned silence of teammates and spectators. Yet beyond the dramatic visuals was the profound life change Thiesmann faced. His career, meticulously built through years of preparation, ended in seconds. He moved from quarterback to commentator, from the stadium spotlight to the sidelines of life. He described the adjustment as devastating. It's not just about losing a game, it's about losing a part of who you are. His words echo the experience of countless players whose careers are terminated by the physical realities of the sport. Not all career-ending collisions are singular, dramatic moments. Some develop gradually from repeated trauma accumulated over seasons. Offensive linemen, linebackers, and running backs face constant collisions, and the toll on their bodies is often invisible until it is too late. Consider the trajectory of a player like Marcus Lattimore, whose knees were repeatedly damaged through college and NFL play. The injuries were cumulative, each collision contributing to an irreversible decline in function. Unlike the instant devastation experienced by Thiesmann or Sharp, these players endure slow erosion, confronting the emotional challenge of recognizing that their body can no longer perform at the elite level required. Spinal injuries, in particular, illustrate the fragility of even the most physically conditioned athletes. Mike Utley's paralysis in 1991 serves as a striking example. A routine play block, a tackle, a push toward the quarterback ended with his body crushed under the weight of the pile. The immediate result was paralysis. The long-term consequence was a complete life transformation. Utley's subsequent advocacy, foundation work, and public presence demonstrate the extraordinary resilience required to navigate such trauma. His thumbs-up gesture, shared with a stunned stadium and broadcast nationwide, symbolizes courage, but it also masks the deeper reality of years of rehabilitation, psychological adjustment, and adaptation to a new way of life. Neurological consequences, particularly chronic traumatic encephalopathy (CTE), have added a new dimension to our understanding of career-ending collisions. Players like Junior So, who posthumously displayed severe CTE, revealed the invisible costs of repeated impacts. These injuries are not sudden or dramatic. They accumulate over time, affecting mood, cognition, and behavior long after a player leaves the field. So's tragic death by suicide underscores the long-term psychological toll of repeated collisions, highlighting the dual danger of career-ending hits: visible trauma and invisible, cumulative damage that continues to affect health and well-being. The financial dimension of career-ending collisions is significant. Players who lose their careers prematurely often forfeit anticipated earnings, endorsement deals, and long-term financial stability. Even with league pensions and medical programs, the abrupt cessation of income creates stress and uncertainty. Families are deeply affected, as partners often become caregivers and children witness the transformation of a parent from athlete to patient. The ramifications extend beyond the individual, altering the dynamics of households, the trajectory of careers outside sports, and the psychological stability of family members. Culturally, career-ending collisions highlight a profound contradiction at the heart of professional football. The sport is celebrated for physicality, aggression, and endurance. Yet these same traits are the source of career-ending injuries. Fans admire bone-crushing tackles and relentless effort, but often overlook the long-term consequences. Highlight reels celebrate collisions without acknowledging the players who never return, the families reshaped, and the silent trauma that follows. This tension between spectacle and human cost defines the modern understanding of the NFL and the ethical considerations it must navigate. Psychologically, the aftermath is complex and profound. Athletes who endure career-ending collisions often experience depression, anxiety, and identity loss. The sudden removal from the game, which defined their life and purpose, can destabilize mental health. Joe Theismann's reflections after his injury capture the essence of this challenge. It sets not just physical, it's who you are. The collision itself is brief, but the emotional, social, and psychological consequences endure for decades. Understanding this is crucial to fully appreciating the human cost of the sport. Medical advances, while significant, cannot eliminate risk. Helmets, padding, and concussion protocols reduce but do not remove danger. Spinal injuries, severe ligament tears, and concussions remain largely irreversible. The NFL continues to innovate, but the fundamental physics of the game speed, mass, and impact cannot be altered. Career-ending collisions are thus a combination of human limitation, inherent physical risk, and systemic factors embedded within the sport. Yet amid these tragedies, resilience emerges as a defining theme. Players like Eric LeGrand, paralyzed in college, and Mike Utley, paralyzed in the NFL, demonstrate remarkable adaptation. They transform personal loss into advocacy, mentorship, and public influence. Their stories reveal that while careers may end, purpose, inspiration, and impact can endure. The narrative of career-ending collisions is not solely about loss. It is about the human capacity to confront adversity, redefine identity, and contribute meaningfully beyond the game. The contrast between sudden, dramatic collisions and slow, cumulative damage is instructive. Players like Bo Jackson or Joe Theismann experience immediate, life-altering events, whereas others, like Marcus Lattimore, face gradual degradation. Both paths lead to the same endpoint of career that cannot continue, but the psychological and social adaptation differs. The NFL encompasses both forms of risk, creating a complex landscape of injury that challenges medical professionals, families, and the players themselves. The social impact of career-ending collisions is equally significant. Families face emotional, logistical, and financial challenges. Partners become caregivers. Children grow up witnessing the abrupt transformation of a parent from athlete to patient. Communities witness the hero's fall and are often unprepared for the long-term consequences. Career-ending hits are not isolated incidents. They ripple outward, reshaping lives beyond the player alone. Chris Borland's story exemplifies awareness and preventive action. He walked away from a promising career due to concern over long-term neurological damage from repeated collisions. Borland's decision was controversial, but illuminates the evolving understanding of cumulative trauma. His choice underscores the growing recognition that career-ending injuries are not only the result of single events, but also of repeated exposure to high-impact collisions. The awareness, courage, and foresight demonstrated in his decision offer a template for evaluating risk in the modern NFL. Economic realities compound the challenges. Players with shortened careers lose future earnings, endorsements, and investment opportunities. Even with pension programs and medical support, the abrupt end of income creates stress and uncertainty. Families adjust, often taking on caregiving roles and managing both medical and emotional needs. Career-ending collisions, therefore, represent not only physical and psychological trauma, but also social and economic disruption, with consequences that extend for decades. Understanding career-ending collisions demands empathy, analysis, and acknowledgement of the human element. They are not mere statistics or dramatic highlights. They are life-changing events with cascading consequences. Sterling Sharp, Joe Theismann, Bo Jackson, Mike Utley, Dennis Bird, Alex Smith, and countless others remind us that behind every collision is a human life, a family, and a future permanently altered. These events challenge our perception of the sport, urging us to consider the costs hidden behind the spectacle of football. Ultimately, career-ending collisions are emblematic of the paradox at the heart of professional football. The sport celebrates strength, speed, and courage. Yet these same attributes make players vulnerable to sudden and irreversible injury. Collisions can destroy careers, alter identities, and challenge the human spirit. Yet they also inspire stories of resilience, adaptation, and advocacy. They demand that we look beyond statistics and highlight reels, recognizing the human lives behind the helmets. The cumulative narrative of these players teaches us a fundamental truth. The NFL is more than a contest of athleticism. It is a domain where human bodies, minds, and lives are continually tested. Every collision carries risk. Every career-ending hit carries a story of vulnerability, courage, and adaptation. These stories compel reflection on ethics, responsibility, and the cultural values embedded within the sport. Career-ending collisions challenge players, leagues, and fans to reconcile admiration for athletic achievement with recognition of human vulnerability. They remind us that the game, in all its intensity and spectacle, is inseparable from the risks it imposes. Every snap, every tackle, every hit has consequences far beyond the field. Understanding these narratives is essential to fully grasping the cost of the sport and the courage of those who participate. The paradox of career-ending collisions lies in their dual nature. They are both devastating and transformative. They remove players from the game, yet offer an opportunity to redefine purpose, inspire others, and advocate for safer practices. They reveal the fragility of human capability while demonstrating resilience in the face of adversity. Players like Mike Utley, Eric Lee Grant, and Dennis Bird embody this paradox, turning personal loss into broader societal impact. In reflecting on these narratives, one truth is clear. Career-ending collisions are not anomalies. They are an intrinsic part of football. They challenge identity, test resilience, and shape the trajectory of human lives. The stories of those who endure these collisions illuminate the courage, vulnerability, and determination that define the sport at its core. Career-ending collisions are often described in medical terms: fractures, torn ligaments, spinal cord injuries, or concussions. But to understand their true impact, we must look beyond the body to the human experience, the sudden loss of purpose, the abrupt severing of identity, and the emotional shock that can accompany the physical trauma. Each player who experiences such a hit confronts a reality few outside the NFL can truly grasp. The collision is over in seconds, but its effects echo for a lifetime. Consider the story of Alex Smith, a quarterback whose injury in 2018 was both catastrophic and nearly fatal. During a routine play, Smith's leg was broken in multiple places, puncturing an artery and leading to life-threatening complications. The physical trauma alone was immense, but the ensuing infections, surgeries, and rehabilitation created a new set of challenges. Smith's career seemed over not because of a single broken leg, but because the injury was compounded by medical complications that threatened not only his football future, but his life. "I didn't just lose football," Smith reflected years later. "I lost the life I had built around it." His story is emblematic of the extreme vulnerability that career-ending collisions impose on even the most prepared athletes. Career-ending hits are not limited to the NFL's stars or marquee players. They strike indiscriminately, from rookie linemen learning the speed of the game to seasoned veterans whose bodies have endured hundreds of collisions. Dennis Bird's 1992 injury, which left him paralyzed, illustrates how quickly a career can be derailed. On a seemingly ordinary play, Bird collided with a teammate, fracturing his cervical vertebra. In an instant, the physicality that had defined him became a source of limitation, turning the field of play into a stage for life-altering consequences. Bird's eventual rehabilitation, walking again with braces and walking aids, demonstrates extraordinary resilience, yet underscores the profound reality that no preparation can guarantee safety. Repeated trauma adds a different dimension to the concept of career-ending collisions. Players who endure constant high-impact plays, linebackers, running backs, linemen, may accumulate injuries that gradually compromise their ability to compete. Marcus Lattimore's career exemplifies this pattern. a collegiate star with enormous potential. Lattimore's knees were irreparably damaged through repeated collisions, effectively ending his professional prospects before he could fully establish himself in the NFL. Unlike the abrupt, singular injuries suffered by Theismann or Bird, cumulative damage creates a slow, inexorable decline, forcing athletes to confront the limits of the human body over time. Spinal injuries represent the most visually dramatic and life-altering collisions. Mike Utley's paralysis in 1991 remains a defining example. A routine play, a misstep, a miscalculated block, suddenly Utley was pinned, his spinal cord crushed. The immediate aftermath was catastrophic. He could no longer walk, let alone compete. Yet Utley's resilience transformed tragedy into advocacy. His work with spinal injury foundations and public speaking highlights the human capacity to adapt, influence, and redefine purpose after life-altering collisions. While the initial moment of impact is remembered, the longer-term story of adaptation and contribution is equally powerful, though less visible. Neurological injuries like chronic traumatic encephalopathy, CTE, highlight the hidden consequences of repeated collisions. Junior So's posthumous diagnosis revealed severe CTE, which contributed to behavioral and emotional disturbances leading to his suicide. Unlike a broken leg or paralyzed spine, CTE is insidious, developing silently over years of high-impact play. The effects may not manifest until long after a player's career ends, illustrating the prolonged human cost of collisions. For So and countless others, the trauma was not limited to a single play, but accumulated over a decade of violent impacts that left the brain vulnerable to degeneration. The emotional ramifications extend to families and communities. Wives, partners, parents, and children bear the weight of the player's sudden change in circumstance. They adjust to new caregiving roles, manage financial instability, and cope with the emotional trauma of witnessing a loved one's physical and psychological decline. Career-ending collisions are not isolated events. They ripple outward, reshaping households, relationships, and the social fabric surrounding the player. Families become integral participants in the post-collision narrative, navigating challenges that are physical, financial, and emotional. Financial consequences are an often overlooked dimension. Players who leave the game prematurely may lose expected salaries, endorsements, and long-term career opportunities. Even with pension programs and health benefits, the sudden cessation of income imposes stress on both the athlete and their family. Career-ending collisions create a multi-layered reality. Players face the physical trauma of the injury, the emotional fallout, and the economic disruption that accompanies abrupt career termination. These combined pressures make the post-injury period as challenging, if not more so, than the immediate aftermath of the collision itself. Cultural factors in football amplify these consequences. The NFL's culture rewards toughness, valorizes pain endurance, and often stigmatizes withdrawal from play, even when injury risk is high. Players are celebrated for playing through it. Yet this ethos can exacerbate the effects of collisions, encouraging participation even in the presence of underlying injuries. The tension between cultural expectations and human vulnerability creates a complex ethical landscape, where career-ending collisions are inevitable and sometimes preventable only in hindsight. The psychological aftermath is profound. Players often struggle with depression, anxiety, and identity loss after a collision ends their career. Joe Theismann articulated this struggle, saying, "It's not just physical, it's who you are." Athletes define themselves through the game. When the game is taken away, they face the daunting task of redefining purpose. Recovery is not merely about regaining physical function. It is about reconstructing a sense of self, navigating grief for the lost career, and finding meaning beyond the sport that once defined them. Medical interventions, though advanced, cannot eliminate risk. Helmets, padding, and advanced surgical techniques can mitigate injury severity, but cannot prevent collisions from occurring or fully repair damage once it has happened. The NFL's emphasis on medical oversight and concussion protocols represents progress, yet the game's physicality remains unchanged. Career-ending collisions, therefore, are a confluence of physics, biology, and human limitations. A reminder that even elite preparation cannot guarantee safety. Resilience and adaptation are central themes in the aftermath of career-ending collisions. Mike Utley, Eric LeGrand, and Dennis Bird exemplify the human capacity to respond to trauma with purpose. Utley and LeGrand became advocates and mentors, reshaping their personal tragedy into societal impact. Bird, after regaining some mobility post-paralysis, used his story to inspire and educate. These examples underscore a critical reality. While collisions may terminate careers, they do not extinguish influence, potential, or legacy. Athletes can find new ways to contribute, advocate, and lead even after life-altering events. The spectrum of career-ending collisions, from sudden catastrophic hits to cumulative degenerative injuries, highlights the complexity of risk in professional football. Each collision is unique, yet all share a common theme. They abruptly remove a player from the arena of competition and require profound adaptation. Understanding this spectrum requires empathy and analysis, considering not just the physical injury, but the psychological, social, and financial dimensions as well. Social and cultural implications are equally significant. Fans admire bone-crushing tackles, but often fail to recognize the human cost behind the spectacle. The NFL thrives on impact, yet the stories of players who never return, who endure long-term consequences, remain largely invisible. Career-ending collisions challenge the audience to balance appreciation for athletic achievement with awareness of vulnerability and human fragility. Ethical considerations emerge in how the sport is consumed, regulated, and celebrated. Chris Borland's early retirement underscores the growing awareness of cumulative trauma. He walked away from a promising career not because of a single injury, but because he recognized the long-term neurological risks associated with repeated collisions. Borland's choice highlighted the evolving conversation around player safety and long-term health. Emphasizing preventive awareness alongside reactive medical intervention, his decision reflects a shift in culture. Acknowledging that career-ending injuries are often not sudden, but the result of repeated accumulative trauma. Economic pressures compound the challenges. Players with shortened careers lose anticipated earnings and sponsorships. Families assume caregiving roles, manage financial instability, and navigate emotional fallout. Career-ending collisions thus represent a confluence of physical, psychological, social, and economic disruption, a multifaceted impact that extends far beyond the field of play. Ultimately, career-ending collisions illustrate a paradox. Football celebrates strength, courage, and resilience, yet these same attributes expose players to profound risk. The physical spectacle of the sport is inseparable from the human consequences of collisions. Every snap carries danger. Every tackle carries potential life-altering consequences. And every career-ending hit carries stories of loss, adaptation, and resilience. Understanding these collisions requires looking beyond highlight reels. It demands empathy, historical context, and awareness of the cumulative, physical, and psychological impact of the sport. Sterling Sharp, Bo Jackson, Joe Theismann, Mike Utley, Dennis Bird, Alex Smith, and countless others reveal the human dimension of football or sport that is as much about vulnerability as it is about triumph. Career-ending hits challenge identity, test resilience, and demand adaptation. They are immediate and dramatic in some cases, slow and degenerative in others, but always life-altering. They remind us that the NFL is more than a contest of talent. It is a domain where human bodies, minds, and lives are continually tested against forces that exceed the capacity of even elite athletes. The narratives of those who endure these collisions illuminate both the fragility and resilience inherent in professional football. In reflecting on these stories, a clear truth emerges. Career-ending collisions are more than athletic injuries, they are transformative life events. They reshape identity, challenge resilience, and ripple across families, communities, and cultural understanding of the sport. The narratives of these athletes compel us to recognize the human cost embedded in the spectacle, and to balance admiration for achievement with empathy for vulnerability. Every collision, every abrupt end, every career-altering injury reinforces the paradox at the heart of football. The sport demands physical courage and mental toughness, yet exposes participants to profound risk. Career-ending collisions are a lens through which we understand this paradox. They are both devastating and illuminating, tragic and instructive. They challenge players, leagues, and fans to confront the cost of the game with honesty, reflection, and responsibility. The human stories behind these collisions provide insight into the courage, resilience, and adaptability that define professional athletes. They remind us that football, at its core, is not only a test of skill and strategy, but also a test of human endurance in the face of physical and psychological adversity. Career-ending collisions, while ending professional careers, often mark the beginning of new paths, advocacy, and personal transformation. Career-ending collisions occupy a unique space in the narrative of the NFL. They are immediate, often violent, and always life-altering. Yet their impact reaches far beyond the field. Every hit carries not only the potential to physically incapacitate, but also the power to reshape identity, disrupt families, and challenge the very culture of the sport. To understand these collisions, we must explore both their mechanics and their human consequences. The case of Pat Tillman serves as a powerful, if atypical, lens. While Tillman's career ended not due to a collision, but a military deployment, his story parallels the abrupt, identity-altering nature of career-ending hits. Tillman walked away from the NFL at the height of his career, trading the gridiron for service in Afghanistan. His decision illustrates the profound psychological dimension of leaving the game unexpectedly, whether by injury, external circumstance, or personal choice. For players whose careers end due to collisions, the loss is involuntary, yet the emotional disruption is no less significant. Athletes must quickly confront the reality of a life once defined by football, now forever changed. Physical trauma from career-ending collisions often leaves players permanently altered. Joe Theismann's leg injury, Bo Jackson's hip, and Alex Smith's compound fracture reveal the immediate, catastrophic force of these events. These injuries do not merely prevent continued play, they require extensive medical intervention, rehabilitation, and long-term adaptation. The loss of mobility, diminished athletic function, and chronic pain are constant reminders of a body's vulnerability. Players often describe the moment of injury as instantaneous, but the recovery, if possible at Hallis, drawn out and grueling. The mental toll is as severe as the physical, with frustration, grief, and anxiety accompanying every step toward adjustment. Spinal injuries illustrate both the severity and the unpredictability of career-ending hits. Mike Utley's paralysis after a routine Lions play in 1991 exemplifies the precarious nature of the sport. A seemingly ordinary hit-a-block, a tackle ended his ability to walk, forever altering his life. Yet the human story extends beyond the immediate impact. Utley's resilience, advocacy, and public presence transformed tragedy into opportunity, offering inspiration to countless others facing similar challenges. His journey demonstrates that while career-ending collisions end professional aspirations, they can also catalyze new forms of purpose, leadership, and societal impact. Neurological trauma adds a more insidious dimension to career-ending collisions. Junior So's CTE diagnosis highlights the delayed effects of repeated impacts, which often remain invisible during an athlete's career. Unlike fractures or paralysis, neurological damage may take years to manifest, producing behavioral changes, mood disorders, and cognitive decline long after the final whistle. These invisible injuries are as life-altering as sudden, catastrophic hits, complicating retirement, family life, and mental health. Players like So remind us that the human cost of collisions often extends decades beyond the game, with consequences that are difficult to quantify but impossible to ignore. Psychological adaptation is central to recovery from career-ending collisions. Players face a sudden loss of identity, often defined entirely by their sport from childhood. Sterling Sharp, after his neck injury, described the profound shock of recognizing that his defining life role had vanished. Joe Theismann echoed similar sentiments. You spend your whole life preparing for this, and 1 second can erase it all. These statements illustrate the universal challenge of adjusting to a new reality, where purpose, routine, and self-conception must be reconstructed without the defining structure of professional football. Families bear an equally significant burden. Spouses, children, and parents become central to recovery and adaptation, navigating both emotional and practical challenges. They witness a loved one transition from peak physical condition to vulnerability, from public acclaim to private struggle. Caregiving responsibilities, emotional support, and financial management often fall to family members, creating a ripple effect that transforms household dynamics and long-term life planning. Career-ending collisions are thus deeply social as well as personal events, reshaping lives beyond the individual athlete. Financial consequences further complicate the aftermath. Players who leave the NFL prematurely often lose not only salaries, but also endorsement opportunities and post-career earnings potential. Even with pensions and medical coverage, the sudden financial disruption can impose significant stress. Families may need to adjust living standards, careers, and long-term plans to accommodate the realities of injury. The intersection of physical trauma, psychological adjustment, and economic strain creates a complex web of challenges that defines the lived experience of those affected by career-ending collisions. Cultural factors in the NFL intensify the stakes. The league celebrates toughness, valorizes playing through pain, and stigmatizes withdrawal, which can exacerbate the consequences of collisions. Players may delay reporting injuries, attempt to play through pain, or ignore early signs of cumulative trauma, increasing both the likelihood and severity of career-ending hits. This cultural ethos creates a paradox. The qualities that define elite performance resilience, aggression, and endurance so heighten the risk of irreversible injury. Career-ending collisions are thus both a product of human physiology and cultural expectation. Medical interventions are vital but limited. Helmets, padding, and surgical advances mitigate some risks, but cannot prevent the inherent dangers of high-impact football. Fractures, ligament tears, spinal injuries, and neurological damage cannot always be reversed. Even with rehabilitation, many players face chronic pain, diminished mobility, or ongoing neurological complications. These realities illustrate the gap between technological progress and the immutable physical realities of collision sports. Career-ending injuries are therefore an intersection of biological vulnerability, cumulative trauma, and high-intensity athletic demands. Resilience emerges as a defining characteristic in the aftermath of career-ending collisions. Players such as Mike Utley, Eric Legrand, and Dennis Bird exemplify the human capacity to adapt and redefine purpose. Utley's foundation work, Legrand's advocacy, and Bird's rehabilitation illustrate that, while careers may end, influence, leadership, and societal contribution can continue. These stories underscore a critical truth. Career-ending hits may terminate athletic achievement, but do not extinguish human potential, courage, or resilience. The spectrum of career-ending collisions encompasses both sudden, catastrophic events and slow, cumulative injuries. Players like Bo Jackson and Joe Theismann experienced immediate trauma that ended their careers in a single play. Others, like Marcus Lattimore, faced degenerative injuries that unfolded over years of repeated collisions. Both forms are equally devastating, highlighting the unpredictability and complexity of risk inherent in professional football. Understanding this spectrum requires empathy, analysis, and recognition of the multiple dimensions, physical, psychological, social, and economic of injury. Social and ethical considerations are inseparable from the narrative of career-ending collisions. Fans are captivated by impact and aggression, yet rarely consider the human cost behind the spectacle. The NFL thrives on the intensity of collisions, but players' experiences reveal the invisible toll: identity loss, psychological strain, family disruption, and long-term health consequences. Ethical questions arise regarding safety protocols, league responsibilities, and cultural values that prioritize entertainment over human well-being. Career-ending collisions challenge us to balance admiration for athletic achievement with responsibility for human life. Chris Borland's early retirement exemplifies proactive awareness of cumulative injury. Borland left the NFL after one season, citing concern over long-term neurological damage. His decision was controversial, yet prescient, highlighting the growing recognition that career-ending injuries are not only the result of single catastrophic events, but also of repeated subconcussive trauma. Borland's choice underscores the evolving conversation around player safety and long-term health, reflecting a shift in both culture and personal responsibility within professional football. Economic pressures compound the challenge. Players who lose careers prematurely face lost income, diminished endorsement opportunities, and reduced long-term earning potential. Families must adjust to new realities, including medical expenses, caregiving responsibilities, and altered career trajectories. The intersection of physical trauma, emotional adaptation, and financial strain demonstrates the multidimensional consequences of career-ending collisions, shaping lives far beyond the field of play. Career-ending collisions illuminate a paradox. Football celebrates courage, endurance, and physicality, yet these qualities place players at risk of permanent harm. Each collision is a reminder of human vulnerability and the stakes embedded in the sport. Understanding these stories requires empathy, historical context, and awareness of the cumulative impact of trauma on both career and life. Sterling Sharp, Bo Jackson, Joe Theismann, Mike Utley, Dennis Bird, Alex Smith, and countless others reveal the human reality behind the spectacle, lives forever altered by moments of impact that last only seconds. The psychological, social, and economic dimensions of career-ending collisions illustrate that injury is never isolated. A single hit may terminate a career, but its ripple effects extend to families, communities, and cultural perceptions of the sport. Players, leagues, and fans must consider the full scope of consequences when evaluating the human cost of football. Ethical reflection, medical innovation, and cultural awareness are essential to navigate the complex reality of high-impact sports. Ultimately, career-ending collisions are emblematic of both tragedy and resilience. They terminate careers, yet catalyze adaptation, advocacy, and personal growth. They expose the vulnerability of the human body while illuminating the strength of the human spirit. Players who endure these collisions provide insight into courage, perseverance, and the capacity to redefine purpose in the face of life-altering events. Career-ending collisions are more than injuries. They are transformative life events. They challenge identity, test resilience, and reshape the trajectory of life itself. They compel reflection on ethics, responsibility, and the cultural values embedded in the NFL. These collisions demand that we appreciate both the physical spectacle of the game and the human stories hidden behind the helmets, the statistics, and the highlight reels. Through these narratives, we understand that football is not merely a game of skill and strategy, but a domain where human endurance is continually tested against extraordinary forces. Every collision, every abrupt end, every permanent injury reminds us of the sport's inherent risks. Yet, within this harsh reality lies the potential for growth, transformation, and impact beyond the field. Career-ending collisions are both cautionary and illuminating, tragic and instructive, defining the complex human experience of professional football. Career-ending collisions are not simply moments of physical trauma. they are catalysts for profound transformation. Each hit that abruptly ends a player's professional life triggers a cascade of consequences: physical, psychological, social, and economic. While the spectacle of football often celebrates speed, strength, and aggression, the human cost of these collisions remains largely invisible. Understanding these stories requires us to examine the lives behind the helmets, the families reshaped by sudden loss, and the resilience that emerges in the aftermath of catastrophe. Take the story of Bo Jackson, renowned for his rare combination of speed, power, and agility. Jackson was a dual-sport phenomenon, dominating both football and baseball. Yet a hip injury sustained during an NFL playoff game in 1991 abruptly ended his football career. The collision itself, a single violent moment, destroyed not only his ability to play, but also the dreams he had cultivated from childhood. You spend your entire life training for something, and then it's gone in a flash. Jackson later reflected, "That single hit became emblematic of the fragile boundary between athletic immortality and human limitation, reminding us that even the most extraordinary talent cannot overcome the immutable realities of physics and biology." Sudden, catastrophic collisions like Jackson's are contrasted by injuries that develop insidiously over time. Cumulative trauma, particularly to joints and the brain, can slowly erode performance, leaving athletes to confront the uncomfortable truth that their careers are inevitably ending. Offensive and defensive linemen, who endure hundreds of collisions per season, often experience these slow, career-limiting injuries. Their stories are less dramatic in the moment, but no less devastating. Players may initially play through pain, believing it is temporary, only to realize that repeated impacts have irreversibly altered their physical capacity. Marcus Lattimore, whose knees failed after years of repeated stress, represents this quieter yet equally tragic path toward career termination. Spinal injuries remain among the most visually and functionally devastating forms of career-ending collisions. Mike Utley's paralysis in 1991 is a defining example. A routine play resulted in a catastrophic compression of his spinal cord, immediately ending his professional career and transforming his life. Yet Utley's story is not only about loss. It is also about resilience, adaptation, and advocacy. His subsequent work with spinal injury foundations and public engagement demonstrates the potential for purpose and impact beyond the playing field. For Utley, the collision was the beginning of a new chapter, illustrating that while careers may end, influence, contribution, and personal growth can endure. Neurological injuries, particularly chronic traumatic encephalopathy (CTE), reveal the hidden toll of repeated collisions. The story of Junior So, who exhibited severe CTE posthumously, illustrates the insidious nature of these injuries. CTE often develops silently, manifesting years after retirement, and contributes to emotional instability, cognitive decline, and, in So's case, tragically, suicide. Unlike immediate, visible injuries such as broken bones or torn ligaments, neurological trauma underscores the long-term consequences of cumulative hits, highlighting the need for ongoing research, monitoring, and preventive measures within the sport. The emotional ramifications of career-ending collisions are profound. Players face an abrupt loss of identity, having to find themselves through the game from youth into adulthood. Sterling Sharp, who suffered a neck injury that ended his career, described the psychological shock of recognizing that his primary purpose and sense of self had been stripped away. Joe Theismann echoed similar sentiments, noting, "You spend your whole life preparing for this, and 1 second can erase it all." These reflections underscore the complexity of psychological recovery, which is as critical and enduring as the physical rehabilitation process. Families are deeply affected by these sudden changes. Spouses, children, and parents confront new realities, including caregiving responsibilities, financial adjustments, and emotional support. Career-ending collisions often reshape family dynamics, altering routines, expectations, and long-term life planning. The athlete is no longer the provider, the role model, or the public figure they once were. They become a patient, a survivor, and sometimes a dependent. This shift demands adaptation from both the player and their support network, highlighting the social ripple effects of collisions. Economic implications are a persistent concern. Players who leave the NFL prematurely lose anticipated salaries, endorsements, and future career opportunities. Even with pensions and league-provided medical support, the sudden disruption in income can create lasting financial stress. Families may need to recalibrate budgets, manage medical expenses, and adjust long-term plans. Career-ending collisions thus have multidimensional consequences, intersecting physical, emotional, social, and economic domains in ways that extend far beyond the field of play. Cultural expectations within the NFL exacerbate these risks. The sport glorifies toughness, valorizes pain, endurance, and often stigmatizes withdrawal, creating pressure to play through injury. Players may delay reporting injuries or attempt to push through physical limitations, heightening the likelihood of career-ending collisions. This cultural ethos, which prizes resilience and aggression, paradoxically increases vulnerability, illustrating the complex interplay between physical risk and social expectation. Medical interventions have advanced significantly, but they cannot fully mitigate risk. Helmets, padding, surgical procedures, and concussion protocols reduce injury severity. Yet the inherent forces in football remain unavoidable. Fractures, spinal injuries, and neurological damage cannot always be repaired or reversed. Even after surgery and rehabilitation, many players face chronic pain, reduced mobility, and long-term health challenges. Career-ending collisions therefore exist at the intersection of human limitation, cumulative trauma, and the high-intensity demands of professional football. Resilience emerges as a defining characteristic in the aftermath of these events. Players like Mike Utley, Eric Legrand, and Dennis Bird exemplify the human capacity to adapt and find new purpose. Through advocacy, public speaking, and foundation work, they transform personal tragedy into societal impact. Career-ending collisions terminate athletic achievement, yet they do not extinguish human potential, leadership, or influence. The ability to adapt, redefine purpose, and inspire others is a testament to the resilience inherent in those who endure life-altering collisions. The spectrum of career-ending collisions ranges from sudden, catastrophic injuries to slow, degenerative conditions. Bo Jackson and Joe Theismann experienced instantaneous trauma, while Marcus Lattimore endured a gradual decline. Both paths are devastating, yet they require different forms of adaptation. Sudden injuries demand immediate physical and psychological adjustment, while cumulative injuries necessitate long-term planning, ongoing medical management, and progressive emotional adaptation. Both highlight the inherent risks of the sport and the complexity of human resilience in response to injury. Social and ethical considerations are inseparable from these narratives. Fans often celebrate impact and aggression without considering the human cost. The NFL's success is rooted in the spectacle of collision, yet the consequences for athletes' identity loss, psychological strain, family disruption, and long-term health effects are rarely visible. Ethical questions arise about league responsibility, cultural values, and safety protocols. Career-ending collisions compel reflection on the balance between entertainment and human well-being, demanding awareness and accountability at all levels of the sport. Chris Borland's early retirement illustrates growing awareness of cumulative trauma. Borland voluntarily left the NFL after one season, citing concerns over long-term neurological damage. His decision reflects a shift in player consciousness, recognizing that repeated subconcussive hits can be as damaging as a single catastrophic collision. Borland's choice highlights the evolving conversation around player safety, the long-term risks of football, and the cultural shift toward prioritizing health over immediate performance. Economic realities compound the human challenge. Players who lose careers prematurely face lost income, diminished endorsements, and curtailed future earning potential. Families must navigate financial pressures, medical costs, and caregiving responsibilities. The intersection of physical trauma, emotional adjustment, and financial strain creates a multifaceted burden that extends well beyond the playing field. Career-ending collisions are therefore not isolated events. They are complex life disruptions that affect athletes, families, and communities alike. Career-ending collisions embody a central paradox in professional football. The sport celebrates courage, endurance, and physicality, yet these very qualities expose players to profound risk. Each collision is a stark reminder of human vulnerability, and the consequences of a single moment can ripple across decades of life. Recognizing the human stories behind the spectacle's sterling sharp. Bo Jackson, Joe Theismann, Mike Utley, Dennis Bird. Alex Smith provides a lens to understand the physical, emotional, and social stakes inherent in the game. The psychological, social, and economic dimensions of career-ending collisions demonstrate that injury is never an isolated phenomenon. A single hit may end a career, but its effects extend to families, communities, and cultural perceptions of football. Players, leagues, and fans must consider the full spectrum of consequences, acknowledging both the human cost and the ethical responsibility embedded within the sport. Ultimately, career-ending collisions are both tragic and transformative. They end careers, but catalyze adaptation, advocacy, and personal growth. They expose the vulnerability of the human body while highlighting the strength of the human spirit. Players who endure these collisions provide insight into courage, perseverance, and the capacity to redefine purpose in the aftermath of life-altering events. Career-ending collisions are more than injuries. They are transformative life experiences. They challenge identity, test resilience, and reshape life trajectories. They demand reflection on ethics, responsibility, and the cultural values that underlie professional football. These collisions compel us to look beyond statistics, highlight reels, and media narratives to see the human reality. Lives irrevocably changed in seconds, yet often met with courage, adaptation, and renewed purpose. Through these stories, we understand that football is not merely a sport of skill and strategy. It is a domain where human endurance, vulnerability, and resilience are continually tested. Every collision, every abrupt career termination, every permanent injury reinforces the stakes of the game. Yet, within this harsh reality lies the potential for personal growth, societal contribution, and the profound human capacity to adapt. Career-ending collisions are simultaneously cautionary, tragic, and instructive, defining the complex human experience of professional football in ways that extend far beyond the field. Career-ending collisions represent the final chapter in a professional athlete's story on the field, but they are often the beginning of an entirely new narrative off it. These collisions are defining moments, abrupt, often violent, and invariably life-altering. Yet, as with all great drama, the most profound consequences unfold long after the initial impact. They reverberate through the physical, psychological, social, and economic dimensions of a player's life, leaving a legacy that is both cautionary and inspirational. Consider the story of Joe Theismann. On November 18, 1985, a routine NFL play became the moment that ended his career. A low tackle by Lawrence Taylor fractured Theismann's leg in a way that no amount of skill, preparation, or training could have prevented. The immediate scene was shocking. Teammates frozen in disbelief. The stadium silent, a career that had once seemed indestructible, suddenly over. It wasn't just my leg that broke that day, Theismann reflected years later. It was a lifetime of preparation, a dream, a purpose, all gone in an instant. His story embodies the suddenness and brutality that define career-ending hits in football moments of high-impact violence that transform lives in seconds. Yet not all career-ending injuries are instantaneous. Marcus Lattimore's tale underscores the silent, cumulative toll that collisions take over time. Repeated impacts to his knees slowly eroded his capacity to play professionally. Lattimore endured multiple surgeries and extended rehabilitation, only to discover that his body could no longer withstand the demands of the sport. Unlike Thiesman, Lattimore's collision was not a single moment, but a series of cumulative traumas, emphasizing the variety of ways the NFL can end a career. These two extreme, sudden, catastrophic injuries and gradual degeneration highlight the unpredictable nature of professional football and the constant negotiation between ambition and human vulnerability. Spinal injuries provide another stark illustration of the consequences of career-ending collisions. Mike Utley's paralysis in 1991 is one of the most vivid examples. On a routine play, a miscalculated block compressed his spinal cord, ending his career and altering his life irrevocably. Yet the story does not end with paralysis. Utley's response, resilience, advocacy, and public engagement transformed his personal tragedy into a broader platform for social impact. He became a symbol of courage and adaptation, demonstrating that while careers may end, influence and purpose can persist. Utley's journey exemplifies the duality of career-ending collisions. They destroy on one level while creating new opportunities for growth, leadership, and advocacy. Neurological injuries, particularly chronic traumatic encephalopathy (CTE), illustrate the hidden long-term consequences of repeated collisions. Junior So's posthumous diagnosis revealed severe CTE, a condition linked to behavioral changes, cognitive decline, and emotional instability. So's eventual suicide brought national attention to the unseen toll of collisions in professional football. Unlike fractures or spinal injuries, CTE develops over years, often long after a player has retired. Its insidious nature underscores the silent danger inherent in repeated impacts and the complexity of defining career-ending injuries. Some careers may appear to end prematurely due to visible trauma, while others are curtailed over time by invisible, cumulative brain damage. The psychological ramifications of career-ending collisions are immense. Players define themselves through football from childhood into adulthood. When a collision abruptly ends a career, the loss of identity is profound. Sterling Sharp, whose neck injury ended his career, describes the difficulty of redefining purpose and value beyond the field. Joe Theismann echoed this sentiment, acknowledging the shock of suddenly losing the role that had shaped his life for decades. The struggle is compounded by public visibility. Players are accustomed to adulation and performance, and the transition to relative anonymity can exacerbate feelings of isolation, depression, and anxiety. Families are profoundly affected as well. Spouses, children, and parents navigate the emotional, practical, and financial challenges that arise from sudden career termination. The athlete's identity shifts from provider and public figure to patient and survivor, and family members must adapt accordingly. Career-ending collisions disrupt not just a player's life, but the fabric of their immediate support network, reshaping responsibilities, routines, and long-term planning. The human ripple effect extends far beyond the stadium, illustrating that the consequences of these collisions are deeply social as well as personal. Financial consequences compound these challenges. Premature retirement results in lost income, diminished endorsement opportunities, and reduced long-term earning potential. Even with NFL pensions and medical support, the sudden disruption in economic stability creates stress for players and families. Long-term medical costs, rehabilitation expenses, and lifestyle adjustments often follow. Career-ending collisions are thus multidimensional events affecting physical health, emotional well-being, social relationships, and economic security. Cultural norms within football amplify the stakes. The NFL glorifies toughness, perseverance, and playing through pain. While these values foster elite performance, they also increase the likelihood of catastrophic injury. Players may underreport injuries, attempt to continue playing despite physical limitations, or ignore early warning signs of cumulative trauma. This cultural pressure intertwines with the physical realities of the sport, producing collisions that are often unavoidable yet devastating. Career-ending hits are therefore a product of both human physiology and a cultural system that prizes spectacle, aggression, and resilience above all else. Medical interventions mitigate risk but cannot eliminate it. Helmets, padding, surgical advances, and concussion protocols reduce the severity of injuries but cannot prevent the inherent forces of football collisions. Fractures, spinal injuries, and neurological damage cannot always be fully repaired. Even with intensive rehabilitation, many athletes face chronic pain, reduced mobility, or ongoing neurological complications. Career-ending collisions, then, exist at the intersection of human fragility, cumulative trauma, and the high-intensity demands of the sport. Resilience remains a central theme. Players like Dennis Bird, Mike Utley, and Eric LeGrand demonstrate the human capacity to adapt, find new purpose, and influence others despite career-ending trauma. Bird's return to public life and advocacy following paralysis, Utley's foundation work, and LeGrand's motivational efforts exemplify the ways in which athletes transform tragedy into societal impact. These stories remind us that while the field may no longer define them, career-ending collisions do not extinguish influence, leadership, or personal growth. The spectrum of career-ending collisions, sudden versus cumulative, visible versus invisible, highlights the complexity of risk in professional football. Sudden catastrophic injuries like Thiesman's or Jackson's are dramatic and immediate, while cumulative injuries like Lattimore's or CTE cases develop slowly over time. Both forms have profound consequences, challenging athletes to adapt, families to cope, and the league to confront systemic risks. Understanding this spectrum requires empathy, analytical perspective, and recognition of the multifaceted impact on human lives. Ethical considerations are inseparable from these narratives. Fans admire aggression, impact, and speed, yet rarely consider the human cost. The NFL relies on the spectacle of collisions, but the consequences for athletes' identity loss, psychological strain, family disruption, and long-term health issues are often invisible. Questions arise about league responsibility, safety regulations, and cultural values. Career-ending collisions force reflection on the balance between entertainment and human welfare, demanding both awareness and ethical responsibility. Chris Borland's voluntary retirement illustrates growing awareness of cumulative trauma. Borland left the NFL after a single season, citing concerns over long-term brain damage. His decision reflects a cultural shift, emphasizing long-term health over immediate performance. Borland's choice underscores the reality that career-ending injuries may result not only from sudden catastrophic events, but also from repeated subconcussive hits that accumulate over time. His story highlights the evolving conversation around player safety, culture, and personal responsibility in professional football. Economic consequences intersect with social and psychological pressures. Players face lost income, reduced endorsements, and limited long-term earning potential. Families adjust to new financial realities, manage medical and rehabilitation costs, and navigate caregiving responsibilities. Career-ending collisions disrupt more than just athletic careers. They create a multi-dimensional life disruption that touches nearly every aspect of a player's existence. The paradox of professional football is clear. The sport celebrates physical courage, resilience, and strength. Yet these very attributes expose athletes to extraordinary risk. Every collision is a reminder of human vulnerability, and the consequences of a single play can reverberate for decades. Recognizing the stories behind the helmets, the pain, adaptation, and resilience provides essential insight into the human cost of the game. Sterling Sharp, Bo Jackson, Joe Theismann, Mike Utley, Dennis Bird, Alex Smith, and countless others illuminate the reality of career-ending collisions, revealing lives irrevocably changed in seconds, yet often met with courage, adaptation, and renewed purpose. Psychological, social, and economic dimensions demonstrate that injury is never isolated. A single collision may end a career, but its impact extends to families, communities, and cultural perceptions of football. Players, leagues, and fans must account for the full consequences of these collisions, acknowledging both the human cost and ethical responsibility embedded within the sport. Career-ending collisions are simultaneously tragic and transformative. They terminate athletic careers, but catalyze personal growth, societal impact, and renewed purpose. They reveal human vulnerability while highlighting the resilience, adaptability, and strength of spirit that define athletes beyond their physical achievements. Players enduring these collisions provide insight into courage, perseverance, and the capacity to redefine life after professional football. They are more than injuries, they are transformative life events. Career-ending collisions challenge identity, test resilience, and reshape life trajectories. They compel reflection on ethics, responsibility, and the cultural values that underpin professional football. Through these narratives, we see the human reality beyond statistics, highlights, and media narratives. Lives forever altered in moments, yet met with determination, adaptation, and growth. Football is not merely a contest of skill and strategy. It's a domain where human endurance, vulnerability, and resilience are continually tested. Every collision, every abrupt career ending, every permanent injury reinforces the stakes of the game. Within this harsh reality lies the potential for transformation, societal contribution, and enduring human resilience. Career-ending collisions are cautionary, tragic, and instructive, providing a profound lens through which we understand the complex human experience of professional football. In the end, the stories of those who endure career-ending collisions are stories of resilience, adaptation, and transformation. They illuminate the human spirit under pressure, the fragility and strength of the body, and the capacity to redefine purpose in the wake of trauma. These narratives demand attention, reflection, and empathy, reminding us that football is as much about human endurance as it is about victory, statistics, or spectacle. Career-ending collisions define a paradox of professional football. They are at once the sport's most devastating consequence and its clearest demonstration of human resilience. They end careers, yet catalyze new journeys. They destroy physically, yet can foster psychological and societal growth. The legacy of these collisions extends far beyond the field, providing critical insight into the realities of the game, the cost of impact, and the extraordinary capacity of players to endure, adapt, and inspire. Every hit, every sudden end, every permanent injury is a story that demands to be told. And in telling these stories, we honor not just the spectacle of the game, but the humanity of those who play it, who risk their bodies, identities, and futures for the pursuit of excellence and the love of football. Career-ending collisions may close one chapter, but they open countless others, offering lessons in courage, resilience, and the indomitable spirit of the human athlete. As we reach the end of this exploration into the human cost of the NFL, it becomes clear that career-ending collisions are more than isolated moments of injury. They are transformative events that reverberate across a player's entire life, from sudden, catastrophic hits to slow, cumulative trauma. These collisions expose the fragility of the human body, the vulnerability of the psyche, and the ripple effects that extend to families, communities, and the culture of the sport itself. To truly understand the NFL, we must confront these stories not merely as statistics, highlight reels, or game footage, but as lived experiences, moments of trauma that forever reshape identity and purpose. The NFL thrives on spectacle, on speed, strength, and the raw power of impact. Fans celebrate monumental collisions, record-breaking plays, and legendary performances. Yet beneath this surface lies a more complex reality, a culture that glorifies endurance and aggression, while often obscuring the hidden costs borne by the players themselves. Career-ending collisions force us to confront the human vulnerability at the core of the sport. When Bo Jackson's hip was destroyed, when Joe Theismann's leg shattered, when Mike Utley's spinal cord was compressed, these were not just injuries, they were life-altering events that abruptly stripped away careers, ambitions, and identities. And for every household name, there are countless other athletes whose careers ended quietly, whose struggles never reached the national spotlight, but whose lives were equally irrevocably changed. Physical trauma is the most visible consequence. Broken bones, torn ligaments, spinal injuries, and concussions are the immediate markers of career-ending collisions. Yet, even as medical technology advances with helmets, padding, surgical techniques, and rehabilitation protocols, there remains an inherent risk that cannot be fully mitigated. Football is a collision sport, and no amount of preparation can entirely protect the human body from catastrophic impact. These injuries are a stark reminder of the limitations of the human frame and the enormous forces involved in professional football. The human body, for all its resilience and conditioning, is never invincible. Neurological consequences introduce a more insidious dimension. Chronic traumatic encephalopathy (CTE) has changed the way we understand career-ending collisions. Unlike fractures or spinal injuries, which are immediately apparent, CTE often emerges years after the final whistle. Junior So, whose posthumous diagnosis revealed severe CTE, highlighted the long-term cognitive, emotional, and behavioral consequences of repeated head trauma. Symptoms such as depression, impulsivity, and cognitive decline illustrate that the end of a player's career does not mark the end of the impact it continues to unfold over decades, affecting both the individual and their family. In this way, career-ending collisions are both immediate and enduring, visible and invisible, demonstrating that the consequences of football extend far beyond the field. The psychological dimension is equally profound. Identity in professional sports is often inextricably tied to performance. For athletes who have trained since childhood, their lives are defined by routines, goals, and the pursuit of excellence. A career-ending collision is not merely a physical setback, it is a sudden and sometimes violent erasure of purpose. Sterling Sharp, whose neck injury ended his career, described the struggle to redefine himself outside the context of football. Joe Theismann spoke of the shock of losing a life's work in a single play. These experiences reveal that recovery is not only about healing the body, it's about reconstructing identity, purpose, and self-worth in a world suddenly devoid of the structures and accolades that once defined life. Families bear a unique and critical burden. They witness the transformation of an athlete from physical prowess to vulnerability, from public acclaim to private struggle. They navigate caregiving, emotional support, and financial adaptation. Career-ending collisions ripple through the family unit, altering relationships and reshaping expectations. This is a human cost rarely acknowledged by fans or the broader culture, yet it is central to understanding the total impact of these injuries. Families endure alongside the athlete, absorbing the shock, adapting to new realities, and providing a framework for resilience. Economic consequences further complicate the picture. Players who leave the NFL prematurely often face lost income, diminished endorsement opportunities, and reduced future earning potential. Even with league pensions and medical support, the sudden disruption to financial stability adds stress to an already challenging transition. For many, managing medical expenses, rehabilitation, and family obligations becomes a pressing concern, highlighting the intersection of physical injury, emotional strain, and financial responsibility. Career-ending collisions, then, are multidimensional events, reshaping lives across multiple domains simultaneously. The cultural environment of football amplifies these risks. The NFL celebrates toughness, valorizes playing through pain, and often stigmatizes withdrawal. Athletes are conditioned to endure discomfort, push through injury, and suppress vulnerability. While these cultural norms produce elite performance, they also increase exposure to catastrophic injury. Players may delay reporting symptoms, attempt to continue playing despite limitations, or ignore early warning signs of cumulative trauma. Career-ending collisions are not purely accidents. They are, in part, the result of a cultural system that prizes spectacle, aggression, and toughness above human safety. Yet within these tragic narratives lies resilience. Athletes such as Mike Utley, Dennis Bird, Eric Legrand, and Bo Jackson exemplified the human capacity to adapt, find new purpose, and contribute meaningfully beyond the field. Utley's advocacy for spinal injury foundations, Bird's motivational work, and Legrand's public engagement highlight the ways in which personal tragedy can catalyze societal impact. Career-ending collisions terminate athletic achievement, yet they do not extinguish influence, leadership, or human potential. These stories demonstrate that resilience is not simply surviving a collision. It is the ability to transform adversity into purpose, inspiration, and action. The spectrum of career-ending collisions, from sudden catastrophic injuries to slow, cumulative damage, illuminates the unpredictable and multifaceted nature of professional football. Bo Jackson and Joe Theismann experienced instantaneous, violent trauma. Marcus Lattimore, on the other hand, endured degenerative injuries that gradually eroded his ability to compete. Both scenarios are devastating, yet they require distinct forms of adaptation and support. Understanding this spectrum emphasizes the need for empathy, medical insight, and cultural reflection, reminding us that the human cost of football extends beyond the moments captured on film. Ethical considerations emerge from these narratives. Fans are enthralled by the intensity of collisions, yet the consequences for players are often invisible. The NFL thrives on spectacle, but the cost side and TD loss, psychological strain, family disruption, and long-term health complications demand ethical scrutiny. Player safety, league responsibility, and cultural values must be examined critically. Career-ending collisions serve as both a mirror and a warning, reflecting the tension between entertainment and human welfare, and challenging all stakeholders to balance the spectacle of sport with ethical accountability. Chris Borland's early retirement exemplifies the growing awareness of cumulative trauma and long-term neurological risk. Borland left the league after one season, prioritizing long-term health over short-term achievement. His decision was controversial but prescient, highlighting the evolving dialogue around player safety, the risks of repetitive collisions, and the necessity of informed decision-making. Borland's choice illustrates a broader cultural shift, emphasizing that career-ending injuries are not always abrupt or visible. They can result from the accumulation of countless subconcussive impacts over time, demanding vigilance and proactive awareness from both players and the league. Financial, social, and emotional consequences intertwine, shaping the post-injury lives of athletes. Lost income, reduced endorsements, and long-term earning potential intersect with emotional trauma, family disruption, and physical limitation. Career-ending collisions create complex life disruptions that touch nearly every aspect of a player's existence. Understanding the full impact requires a holistic perspective, one that considers not only the immediate injury, but also the lifelong implications for identity, relationships, and opportunity. The paradox of football is stark. The sport rewards toughness, resilience, and physicality, yet these qualities simultaneously increase the likelihood of catastrophic injury. Every collision is a reminder of human vulnerability, and the consequences can span decades. Understanding career-ending collisions requires us to look beyond statistics and highlight reels, to recognize the human experience that underpins every story of impact. Sterling, Sharp, Bo Jackson, Joe Theismann, Mike Utley, Dennis Bird, and Alex Smith illuminate the reality behind the spectacle, lives irrevocably changed in seconds, yet often met with courage, adaptation, and new purpose. Psychological, social, and economic dimensions reveal that no injury exists in isolation. A single collision may terminate a career, but its effects reverberate through family systems, community networks, and cultural perceptions of football. Ethical responsibility, medical oversight, and cultural reflection are essential to mitigating the human cost of the sport. Players, leagues, and fans must acknowledge these realities and consider the broader consequences of each collision. Ultimately, Career-ending collisions are both tragic and transformative. They terminate athletic achievement but catalyze personal growth, advocacy, and resilience. They reveal vulnerability while highlighting the human capacity to adapt, persevere, and find purpose beyond professional football. Athletes who endure these collisions offer critical insight into courage, identity, and the ability to redefine life trajectories in the aftermath of trauma. These collisions are more than injuries. They are defining life events. They challenge identity, test endurance, and reshape future possibilities. They demand reflection on ethics, responsibility, and the cultural values embedded in professional football. Through these stories, we move beyond the superficial spectacle to recognize the humanity, resilience, and adaptability of those who endure life-altering collisions. Football is not simply a contest of skill, strategy, and athleticism. It is a stage where human vulnerability, endurance, and resilience are continuously tested. Every collision, every abrupt career termination, every permanent injury underscores the stakes inherent in the game. Yet within these harsh realities exists the potential for transformation, societal contribution, and human achievement beyond physical prowess. Career-ending collisions, as tragic as they are, reveal the depth of human courage and capacity for adaptation. In the end, the stories of those who endure career-ending collisions are stories of resilience, reinvention, and human potential. They illuminate the cost of professional football, but also the extraordinary strength and adaptability of the athletes themselves. The spectacle of the game is inseparable from the human consequences, and the lives behind the helmets are as compelling and instructive as the plays themselves. Career-ending collisions may close one chapter, but they open countless other stories of courage, advocacy, and transformation that resonate far beyond the stadium lights. Every hit, every sudden end, every permanent injury is a narrative that demands attention, reflection, and empathy. These stories honor the humanity of the athletes, highlighting their endurance, vulnerability, and capacity for adaptation. Career-ending collisions define the paradox of professional football. The sport's greatest risk is also its most potent lens for understanding courage, resilience, and the human spirit. By acknowledging the full impact of career-ending collisions, physical, psychological, social, and economic, we gain a clearer understanding of both the sport and its participants. The NFL is a domain of extraordinary achievement and extreme risk, where triumph and tragedy coexist in every collision. The stories of players who endure career-ending hits offer lessons in human strength, resilience, and the enduring capacity to redefine purpose when life as they knew it is abruptly altered. In reflecting on these narratives, we are reminded that football is far more than a game. It is a crucible of human experience, testing the limits of endurance, character, and spirit. Career-ending collisions, as devastating as they are, reveal not only the cost of the sport, but also the potential for growth, contribution, and inspiration in the aftermath of trauma. These athletes redefine what it means to face adversity, demonstrating that while a collision may end a career, it does not end a life, a legacy, or a capacity to impact the world. Career-ending collisions are a testament to the duality of professional football. They are at once tragic, irreversible, and life-altering, yet they illuminate the extraordinary resilience, courage, and adaptability of the human athlete. Through their experiences, we gain insight into the stakes, realities, and ethics of the sport, understanding that every collision is both a moment of loss and an opportunity for transformation. The NFL's human collisions are therefore more than events on the field. They are narratives of identity, resilience, and transformation. They challenge us to consider the costs of spectacle, the responsibilities of leagues and fans, and the enduring human stories behind every career-ending hit. And in recognizing these truths, we honor not only the game itself, but the extraordinary men who risk everything to play it. Every story, every career-ending collision, every moment of trauma and adaptation contributes to a broader understanding of the sport, its culture, and its human impact. These narratives compel reflection, empathy, and ethical consideration, reminding us that football is not just about wins and losses, statistics, or highlights. It is about people, their lives, and the resilience they demonstrate in the face of irreversible change. The legacy of career-ending collisions extends far beyond the field. It challenges assumptions about toughness, success, and identity. It forces both players and society to reckon with the ethical, medical, and cultural dimensions of professional football. And it reminds us that the true measure of the sport is not just the spectacle of the game, but the courage, resilience, and humanity of the men who play it.